Thanks for attending tonight's meeting. This is the Vinyl Square meeting, as you've seen posted, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that because it was also posted as a Freeman Lake Diagnostic Update because that is going to be the major section of the meeting. But the Vinyl Square meeting, we cover anything that's North Chelmsford in the purview. Vinyl Square is a big project that we have on the horizon, and that's anything. We also cover Varney or anything else that could come up in the north side of town. But again, my name is Joe Tierney, and I'm the current chair of the committee, and I appreciate everybody coming here tonight, and whoever is also joining us via Zoom out there. And the last meeting that we had was December 10th, and we covered some of the changes that Mass DOT had requested through Christine, DPW, and also Howard Stein Hudson, the engineering firm, for the Vinyl Square project. The only thing we're going to touch upon is if Christine has any little tweaks from that meeting, but the reason why I included the links to both the meeting that is on Chelmsford Telemedia's recording on YouTube or on their site, or the actual plans for Vinyl Square was posted in the agenda for tonight's meeting as well. So either you had a question to bring here tonight, or even after that, you can review it from there. And so before we ask if anybody has any questions, I'd just defer to Christine to see if she has any quick updates.
No, thank you. So we did receive all the comments from that meeting and also via email. A couple updates. So we still are before 25% designed, still like going, refining, I guess, the design from that meeting. A few updates, and I know it was discussed that night, is there was some concern about Adams Street and parking impacts generally in the whole intersection, but particularly on Adams Street. We are looking at that to see if we can accommodate a one right in, right out. And we have to make sure how that configures with the intersection and seeing if we could have parking on one side. Right now, there isn't any stripe parking, but we would consider that. So that's something that is still being reviewed. And I know there's a request to have maybe a raised crosswalk at that intersection, or just as it crosses Adams, so we are looking at that as well. Wright Street, we had provided some information that we were potentially looking at Wright Street to become one-way heading towards Middlesex Street. That would allow the addition of 6 parking spaces on Wright Street. And we did conduct some traffic analysis, and the data does show that that would potentially be favorable for the intersection and also based on the use of Wright Street. So that's something that we will likely pursue in the 25% design, making that one way as part of the project. And then, again, general parking concerns. So we are looking at that just to see how we can, for the next update that we provide, really show where parking is potentially lost and then also where it could be, supplemented. And that's one reason why we looked at Wright Street. Also, I guess one of the largest comments we received was in regards to the intersection of Middlesex Street where it meets Route 3 and having that be signalized versus not signalized. I think the request was to consider making it signalized through the 25% design process or the ICE analysis, the traffic ICE analysis with Mass DOT. Their recommendation is that it is not signalized. So Howard Stein Hudson did look at that further and is recommending that it not be signalized. And that largely is because having it signalized, there's not enough of a queue length between, it would not be enough of a queue length, they call it, between that intersection and the main Groton-Dunstable intersection. It would actually have a further negative impact on that intersection. We are still reviewing this recommendation, but that's something that as of right now, it's not signalized, and the data is showing in Mass DOT's recommendation that it should not be. So I guess I don't want to say that's a definite, but that is where we're heading towards, is leaving it as not signalized. That's the only those are really the highlights. Again, there's some other comments, and we are reviewing some of those comments received, but I think overall, those were the 4 major items that were brought up at the meeting and in the comments. So if there's any particular questions, I'd be happy to take them. And also you can always email me with additional questions as well. In terms of a timeline, we're probably still looking at later this spring or summer for some type of 25% update. Like
Is
actual.
still on track for maybe this going into plan in 4 years, I think was.
Yes, so it's still on the tip. And they also, they are looking at the costs just to make sure that, because there potentially is some further utility impacts. I think that was also discussed at that December meeting. So if there's utility impacts and the need for pole relocations, that potentially has some additional costs, or having the need to relocate drainage. So we are also, I guess, updating the cost to see, or that's part of the process, to see if that's reflective of what's on the tip.
Thank you.
So, any questions?
No, I appreciate that, and part of the reason why I wanted to put that in the forefront of the agenda and just keep it for, if you didn't make it, so it was still a reminder to review what the changes were, and Christine had even updated more, is that, to keep it consistent, Christine was kind enough to field her email, field questions and direct you to her email. You can copy me if you want, but she's going to take any questions even after the meeting, if anybody has any running, updates or inquiries to make on the project. So I appreciate that, Christine.
Thank you.
I don't know if anybody has any quick questions, or we have, okay.
I looked at the plans.
Yeah, can you come up and just
My
say your
name is
name and
Steve
where you're from?
Olney. Steve Olney. I have 5 buildings that are going to be impacted in this square. But I noticed you're taking away quite a few parking spaces.
Can you come to a microphone, because otherwise.
This microphone right here, not working.
Oh, no, okay, thank you.
Okay. What I noticed on that plan was there's quite a few parking spaces that are going to be taken away. On Groton Road, you're going to put in a bike lane.
Yes.
Is that necessary? Because, I work there, I'm there all the time, I see 1 bike a month go through. And parking spaces are more important than the bike lane. So, do we have to have the bike lane? Is that
So for Mass DOTs, that is their cross-section that is required. It would have to go through a waiver process. And I don't see that as something that could be compromised if Mass DOTs, it's their right-of-way too,
Right.
that they be built.
But when you're finalizing these plans, parking is more important than the bike lanes.
Sure, so we are looking to minimize parking impacts. As far as the bike lane, that is part of the improvements and is required per Mass DOT.
That's my comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just a quick reminder, the reason why we did this, if you haven't followed the survey, as the town and all that, is because we have to engage and Mass DOT has to be the one that does this project because of the state roads that go through Vinyl Square. And with that comes their requirements and with bike lanes and other things. And what we're trying to do, like Christine mentioned and we talked about on December 10th, is to minimize losing, parking spaces. We want to maintain as much as we can, and that's why we're going to continue to have some more feedback. So any immediate questions, if you did have a chance to review that, that's why we wanted to
Hi, Dan Forzier, also on that same section of Groton and Dunstable Road. I was here at the last meeting. I actually drew up some plans that I had sent to you. Just my thoughts as far as what you guys came up with for a design and as far as the future of Vinyl Square, I feel the money being spent isn't in the best interest of Vinyl Square. Losing parking and making it, it doesn't alleviate any of the traffic. It doesn't improve, from where I stand, Vinyl Square as something to spend money towards in the future. Like if, it'd be
Could you
better.
give us some ideas on what you would?
I drew them all on the plans, which I had sent a couple of weeks ago. I didn't.
send us those
No,
plans.
he was the one that sent me back saying that there was a meeting. I would actually like to be involved in any way possible in moving forward, if, because this definitely impacts, me and my family have multiple businesses in Vinyl Square. I have future interest in continuing to grow in different things in Vinyl Square, and I don't see how these plans are going to benefit it in the future. That's just my opinion.
Dan, I appreciate you being here and to offer to join and contribute to the committee as well with more impact. The major reason why we did that survey was to see what the concerns were certainly the safety, and in fact, during that time, Ron Hennessy, that operates the bowling alley, actually got hit by a car there. So we're trying our hardest to improve Vinyl Square from a safety standpoint and consider everything. So I appreciate you, but those plans, it has to run through the state and all that, but we will continue the feedback like we had said, but we just wanted to touch upon it because that's one of the major projects of this committee.
Excuse
Thank
me,
you.
Joe, can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
Christine, could you clarify what is the process for, like, evaluating input like that comes in the form of such specifics?
So yeah, there isn't any formal process. So typically, Mass DOT has a public hearing right around 25%. I think just because this project has been drawn out, has been taking some time, and we're still before 25%. Mass DOT just had recommended that if you want to have more of an informal input session, so there's no formal process. So what we've asked is just provide input, and that was in December 10th, and we received, I think the latest plans were received a couple weeks ago. I did forward those on to the consultant, and I also plan to respond. So we will respond in an email to those. I think if some comments are received, the comments that were received at the meeting, we can provide some type of summary. There were 2 or 3 emails received, and so I am planning to send a response. And if there's further emails received, I guess that would be the process, is that we will try to address and respond on how those comments can be addressed. There will be a timeline as to where comments could be received until, so I guess I have to finalize that date. Mass DOT is still evaluating prior to 25% design, so my guess is if comments were in the next few weeks, we could try to incorporate that into whatever next iteration there is. So if we say today, so maybe by middle of March, all comments.
Okay. Now, and Dan, to follow up on your question too, and Christine, hopefully you saw what he had at least
I did,
put together.
so
and
I
just-
did see it. I sent it to Howard Stein, and I just haven't reviewed it with him yet.
Okay.
We were going over the comments that were received at the meeting, and also, I know, Brian, you sent some comments, and we've gone through all those. We do have to sit down with the consultant to go over those. Some of those comments will have to also potentially be reviewed with Mass DOT. In terms of having bike lanes, we have to have bike lanes. In terms of having parking spaces between intersections, if it's a parking space within an intersection, we cannot have a parking space within an intersection. So there's some things that we won't be able to do. But we are evaluating all the comments to see if there's any tweaks that can be made.
Okay.
Another point. Instead of having the bicycles go through Vinyl Square, why don't you direct them down Newfield Street? Around Vinyl Square. If they enter, any bike that enters Vinyl Square, they're risking their own life, even with a bike lane. That's why no one goes there. I mean, I see maybe 3 bikes a month go through, but if you directed them down Newfield Street, it would eliminate that.
I
Thank
could
you.
play the devil's advocate and say if you put a bike lane in, there might be more bikes that would come too.
So that, yeah, that's,
Down Newfield Street.
yeah.
Understood.
Yeah, I'll have to bike to my house because they're taking away the parking spots.
My name is Gary. I was here at the last meeting. You guys had a map up there on the TV, but it's not possible to pull that up? I'm just,
So-
Because the Freeman Lake
Okay.
is gonna be the next, that's why.
Got
Did
it,
you have a
got it.
specific question that you
I
have, or-
did, you mentioned there was gonna be no stop light at Middlesex Street, was it?
So the direction we likely are headed is that there will not be one, and it's because the queue length between both those intersections, it would, basically, the queue length during peak hour would fall into the intersection of Groton Dunstable And that would have a significant impact on that intersection.
Okay, I'm just trying to be clear, though, as you come up Middlesex Street into Vinyl Square, that's where we're talking, right there?
Yes, it will be a new configuration. It will be more teed with Route 3A.
My concern is if you come into Middlesex Street and you're coming into Vinyl Square, you got two lanes. One you can go left, and then the other one where most of the cars go, 80% of those cars go straight, they continue right down Tingsboro Road, Route 3. Do those cars now that continue on straight down Tingsboro Road, do they have to now kind of go to the left and stop and then go right?
There is a turn pocket, so there will be.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was out there the other day and I counted and I looked at all those cars for about 10 or 15 minutes. I'm gonna tell you all right now, that is an absolute catastrophe. You're gonna back traffic up all the way to the railroad tracks if you stop. If every car that comes into Vinyl Square, and there is so many, and we're trying to not just get them out, we're trying to get them in there, get them out. That, I can't imagine every one of those cars having to take a kind of a left and stop. You have to stop, you just can't keep going. Even if there's no light, because all the cars coming down from the fire station are just stacked all the way up to how can you get out? There's no room. I'm not asking you, I'm begging you to rethink that situation. I would keep those cars going straight.
I can see both arguments, because I can see how that is a tight area for the double stop, but that's one of the concerns we have is Middlesex and that backing up. That and parking, and so those are two major changes from where we were with NEMCOG's plan to now where DOT thinks it needs to be. So that's why I want to make sure people are taking a look at this and we're.
A lot of things on your plan were good. I kind of have to agree with these guys back here with that, but I got a bike. All right, it's electric, but still.
I'm not driving my bike through
It's-
Vinyl Square
It
either.
is a danger to drive your bike through Vinyl Square. I mean, I do it, but when I do it, I'm a little bit on the nervous side. But parking is so much more important than a bike that comes through once a month. Like he said, he's not lying. There's not, he's exaggerating a little bit, but maybe one a day. But,
Not even that.
but.
Now,
I'm
that's,
the one
like I
day, I
said,
go
that's
every
one
day.
of the
this-
concerns. We
Yeah.
will bring that, and we will appreciate, and we'll send out the notices for the next meeting in
Yeah,
March.
I mean, I
But
can
I'm
say.
I'm begging you to keep that Middlesex going straight. I don't use it. I go around Vinyl Square. I already know better. But keep it straight. Just go out and spend go at 4:30, 5 o'clock.
It can't be the way it was. It's gonna be, that's gonna be green space, but I'm more concerned about them wanting to take the light and, because we were told it was gonna be timed and they were all gonna work in sync to keep it moving. So, but that, I get it.
But every car has to kind of go left now, and then even though they have a light, it's a very slow.
It's
That's what the
a
cars coming
disaster
down
the
from
way it is
fire
right
station,
now. I
I'm
mean,
blocking you.
it's
Because
a,
they're gonna block you, because they're gonna keep pushing and pushing and pushing. Then they're gonna get a yellow light.
keep an eye out for the March meeting. I
Then
appreciate
they're gonna
that.
get a yellow light, and they're still gonna go through that yellow light until you can't get out. And just rethink that. You really.
What,
The
Christine,
clock's going there, and the clock is important.
Christine, Joe, do those two islands, I'm sorry if I don't remember everything, do they create more parking? Wasn't part
There
of
might be
those
two
islands?
spaces that it creates. I have to double check that, especially if it's not signalized, because that's the thing, by adding signalized, it would have further parking impacts. I mean, Mass DOT is not recommending the intersection, and because the queue length impacts the main intersection, probably won't be able to put it signalized. But I think we do need to look at maybe how to make that the most efficient as
Oh,
possible.
I'm putting no signal. I'm just asking you to keep going straight. Instead
Yeah,
of
that's the
making
green,
everybody-
that's the green space, and that does, we'll look, I think, we'll look to see how we can accommodate that. I think they also having it teed, does add some, because I think having it the way that it aligns with, Route 3A right now, that might be a safety concern, because I guess because you have people that are going out this way, and then you have also people that are going straight. Having it teed, even though I understand your concern, adds safety, because you have to stop, it's a full stop control, and you're turning.
Be very interesting, but he made a comment, what would you do for parking, do you have, I have just one idea, I'm gonna throw it, I know it's never gonna happen, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Buy the hardware store and make it parking. Let's be honest.
I'll go with that.
It's a dump.
I'll even give you a donation.
Now, I don't know who's gonna pay for it, I know the town probably doesn't have a lot of money, and I'm assuming that the DOT is paying for all our work in Vinyl Square. Just guess, don't know for sure. but my mind's telling me that. But somebody go to Louise and say, what do you want? And make parking. That would solve a lot of, because you have parking on the other side where the bowling alley is, parking at Rosie's. You don't have parking on that end. Think about it. I bet she'd give I bet
So noted.
I bet she'd sell it. I bet she would. I'm trying to talk her into it. I worked for her all for the last month up in that hardware store, and it is rough.
We agree.
Right.
But I think I could convince her. I think.
Let me know, I'll try to
Good
help
luck.
as well.
Not gonna be
Awesome,
easy.
thank you.
But if I knew the town was interested in it in any way, I could go forward with her and say, Louise, I'm not asking you, I'm begging you. Let's make it happen for the sake, she's 80 years old. Move on. It's time to move on. And
Christine-
that would solve a lot of problems.
Is Mass DOT going to be with us at the next meeting to?
So it
Field
probably won't be
questions.
in March. That's the thing, is they have to have a full design. They have to have their 25% design finalized or near draft, then it goes to a public session. So they were saying spring or summer. So that will not happen in March. It will probably be a little later. I will try to get more of a definitive timeline, if we can say if it's spring or summer.
Okay.
They're doing that more, they
Yeah,
need to
no,
do
we
more
appreciate
now.
it. Keep an eye out for the next one.
I'll hit
I'm very
Louise on
tight
it
with
too.
Louise. If I could bring her, a plan, I might be able to convince her. I think she's ready. Thank you.
Let's do it.
Thank you.
Last comment, if you want to save a lot of money, all you need to do is find another Richie Adams. He had that square all under control. You'd pound right on your hood if you did something wrong.
Really. All right,
Be very much cheaper.
the one other thing that we've been working on, and Bill Gillette has been spearheading this project, is we're going to be adding a clock tower. We want to go to the Back to the Future kind of angle, but Bill's been doing a great job putting this together with fundraising, and I want to give it over to Bill to give an update on the clock.
All right, there's a few committee members in the audience. So the committee met a few times. I'd say some of the highlights. We've got sponsor tiers, so bronze, silver, gold, platinum. There's also bricks that are for lesser money. There's a website, vinylsquareclock.org, and we just put up a banner in the square, and we will look at perhaps a second banner and moving that in a better spot. So right now, Joe, 8,000 in the bank. We got a grant last week for 20,000, and there's another 5 committed. So we have the money for the clock, and we haven't done a whole heck of a lot of advertising yet. When that $20,000 grant hits the bank, I will signal to Christine and Paul that they can issue the purchase order. I have notified the Verdon Clock Company that will be in the next week or two, and we'll continue to advertise things. I'll reach out to the local businesses. We'll continue to sell the bricks. I will get something out on Facebook myself because I haven't done that, but it looks like it will happen, and we can purchase it soon and perhaps look at the spring for the installation.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, as promised, we are here to get an update on Freeman Lake and the Freeman Lake study that was done. And I'm not too, Courtney or Matt, who's going to drive the bus on this? I will be your Vanna and change the slides per you need them, or?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Awesome.
Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Thanks for coming out tonight. This has been a long time in the works, so it's exciting to be able to provide you with some of the results tonight on the Freeman Lake Diagnostic and Management Assessment. Go to the next slide. I'm Matt Ladwig. I'm a certified lake manager with TRC. And here's a little bit of an overview of what we're going to cover tonight. I did keep this fairly brief, but I wanted to do that so that there's time for questions to be able to get everybody information that you're interested in tonight. So, oops. All right. So first, we'll have an introduction. Why we did the study, what we looked at. Then we'll kind of go over the key findings. Water quality, aquatic plants, and the nutrient budget are the focus for tonight. And then finally, the recommendations. So we'll talk about long-term options for the lake. We'll look at some of the near-term priorities that can we can start in on pretty quickly here to tackle some of the biggest issues. We'll cover what can you do as residents and users of the lake, and then we'll also look at funding resources for these kinds of projects. Next slide, please. All right, so just introducing the project. Some people may be familiar with this already, but for those who aren't, what was our scope of work? What did we look at? So our task was to first review and incorporate existing data and prior reports. So we reviewed data that had been collected on the lake before, including aquatic plant mapping that had been done by Solitude just a few years ago, and going all the way back to the 1995 study that was done by Dave Warden, which was pretty comprehensive. In fact, this whole study was designed to almost sort of replicate that study and add a few more things to it. He looked at water quality, he looked at plants, he looked at nutrient budgets. That's why we did that. So that was a key first thing for us to look at. And then we also ended up updating the watershed delineation. So back in 1995, when that first study was done, the tools that we had available to us were pretty coarse. So now we've got all these great digital tools. So we updated the watershed delineation just so we could get better numbers on how big the watershed contributing to Freeman Lake actually is. We also updated land use because, as we know, land use has changed since the 90s. Thankfully, we have new bathymetry, so that's the water depth. We did not do the mapping ourselves, but the state had done some mapping a few years ago, and so we were able to incorporate that as a base layer for our map. And you can see it up there. It's those contour lines. So we were able to, bring a lot of improvements in before we even actually ended up doing any work in the field. Whoops, go back one slide, please. Thank you. So when did we start doing our data collection? Well, we started in October of 2023. We had one quick event there just to kind of go see what things were like in that year before we really got started with the study in depth the following year. And then it basically went for an entire year to October 2024, the very beginning of October. So we looked at water quality from Freeman Lake and its inflows, and those inflows include the diversion from Stony Brook, which is on the south end of that map. It's actually, the diversion itself is off the map, but Station 2, the red station at the bottom, that's our station for the Stony Brook diversion. We also looked at the outflow from the lake. So Station 1, we just looked at discharge there. We didn't do water quality because we took water quality in the lake right next to the dam. And then we also looked at several stormwater outfalls. So there's one on the west, that blue dot on the west, that's outfall 3. Outfall 1 is up off of Route 40 at the north part of the lake, and then outfall 2 is on the eastern side of the lake. So we got 3 stormwater outfalls. And then we actually had, like I said, that in-lake water quality station, which was in the deepest part of the lake, where we did vertical profiles of water quality. As I mentioned before, we did stream flow at the outlet of the lake, but we also did stream flow in Stony Brook diversion. And the kind of stream flow we did was we actually measured flow in the field when we were out there, but we installed continuous data loggers as well to capture water level over the course of that entire year. So we have a pretty good continuous flow record for that year in both of those locations. We also took sediment core samples from Freeman Lake. This is something that, again, Dave Warden didn't do in 1995, but we wanted to see, are there things that may be released from the sediments, nutrients released from the sediments that are also contributing to water quality in the lake. We collected plankton samples, and we did aquatic plant mapping. So that's a whole lot of new data, right, that we collected over that course of that year. Next slide, please. And of course, here's the updated watershed map. So just before I go with the rest of the scope of work, you can see what we're calling the local watershed is that very small yellow part right up around the lake. That's the part that directly contributes to the lake and would under, semi-natural conditions. We don't live in a completely natural area, obviously, but that's the part of the lake that really contributes to the lake, or part of the watershed that really contributes to the lake directly. All of that green stuff, so that the yellow part of the watershed is only 589 acres. All of that green area, that's the Stony Brook watershed, and so the diversion from Stony Brook is basically taking all the stuff that's running off of that entire area through those multiple municipalities and directing it into Freeman Lake. So just remember that as we're going through this tonight. That's 27,000 plus acres. So it's a lot more than 589. Oops, sorry, go back for a second. So as I mentioned, we did develop an updated nutrient budget for Freeman Lake. So that's basically looking at how many nutrients are coming into the lake, staying there, and going out over the course of a year. We compared all those results to those that were obtained in the past. Again, especially the Dave Warden study in 1995, just because that was a pretty comprehensive study. We identified the management issues in the lake, the current management issues as we could see them. We assessed management options, and then we developed recommendations for future management. So that was our scope. And we can go to the next slide. All right, so key findings. Again, these are brief. We did a lot of data collection, so we detailed a lot of that information in the report. And I think the draft report is now posted online. Is that correct? Yep. So you can take a look at all those details if you like. I'm just presenting the highlights tonight so that we can keep my droning on very short. And then you guys can get to questions. But on the right-hand side here, you'll see this is a profile of dissolved oxygen in the lake from last October in purple all the way, sorry, not last October, October 2023 in purple to October 2024 in brown. So at the very top of this graph, that's the surface of the lake. At the very bottom is the bottom of the lake. And each of these represents the amount of dissolved oxygen as a concentration in the water column as you move from the top of the lake down to the bottom. And so what you see is that first purple one that we collected in October 2023, the lake was really well mixed at the time. So we had essentially the same dissolved oxygen from the top to the bottom of the lake. But as we go look at 2024 and move from especially May of 2024 into June and August and even into early October, what we see is the dissolved oxygen at the bottom of the lake actually goes away. It's taken up. And we have very low dissolved oxygen there. That's very stressful for aquatic life. So if you were a trout trying to live in this lake, and you'd be fine in the winter because you'd have plenty of dissolved oxygen, the temperatures would be nice and cold. But as summer comes around, when the dissolved oxygen goes away, you're looking for those cold water temperatures near the bottom of the lake. Well, there's no oxygen there for the trout to breathe. So you can't have holdover trout in this lake because there's no oxygen at the bottom of the lake for several months. So that's something that not only influences the biology, but also influences the chemistry of the lake because it happens for several months. Basically, from May to October, we have no oxygen at the bottom of the lake. Water clarity was pretty low in the lake, so it's about 6 feet or less than 6 feet on average. This is compared to 1995. I think we had more like 9 feet back then. So it has slipped a little bit, at least if you compare those 2 points in time. We have elevated nutrient concentrations, so this is phosphorus in particular, as well as nitrogen. And when you have a lot of nutrients in the lake, that leads to excessive algae and plant growth, which I'm sure most of the people who are in the room and familiar with the lake know about. And again, that's sort of my next point here is we have lots and lots of algal productivity. Even though we didn't document any action level blooms, so that's a health advisory, we do know that they could occur because we found cyanobacteria, which are the types of algae that would trigger those kinds of health advisories in the lake pretty much every month except for April. They were sub-advisory level, but we were just taking a grab sample, once a month, so we could have missed something. The fact that they were there almost all the time means that they're probably sitting there ready to bloom as soon as the conditions are right. So that was interesting to see. And of course, the big concern here is several of these species are known to produce cyanotoxins, and those are not good for people's health. So that's kind of a snapshot on water quality, what we found. You can go to the next slide. Now, aquatic plants, I'm going to have a few maps here. This map on the right-hand side, this is just a map of all the plants that we mapped, primarily looking at aquatic plants, which are ones that grow under the water or coming up to the surface of the water but don't really emerge too far from the water. These ring most of the lake. So you can see all those areas of red and green and yellow and orange. green is sort of the least dense plant beds, and red is the most dense. There's a lot of red on the map, especially on the western side of the lake, but there are also some dense patches on the eastern side of the lake. Perhaps more concerning than just the overall plant cover is that we did have multiple invasive species present. So Eurasian milfoil, which has been there for a while, was observed by us. Fanwort was observed by us as well. We found a plant that's probably been there for a few years but hadn't been documented in the other reports that we reviewed, called water chestnut. And that's a really bad one. We're going to focus on that later on in the presentation, but so that was a new species that we observed. We didn't directly observe curly leaf pondweed or brittle naiad, but we know that those have been reported from the past and have no reason to think that they're not still there. They just seem to have a shorter season where they're actually visible, so they could have just been missed in our visits. Yeah, so there's a lot of plants. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. Looking at Eurasian milfoil and fanwort, so these are two maps. On the left, we've got the Eurasian milfoil. On the right, the fanwort. Kind of in similar areas. At the time when we did our mapping, we had a higher density of Eurasian milfoil, but we did our mapping fairly early in the summer, so I would expect that the fanwort actually picks up and becomes more dense later in the summertime, even though we didn't map it later in the summer. But you can just see here, they're both present, and again, particularly in that southern cove of the lake and then the western side of the lake and some of the shallower spots on the eastern side. These are both submerged plants, but in shallow water, they'll top out, so you'll actually see them kind of coming up to the water surface. They get in the way if you're trying to recreate or swim, so they're not a lot of fun. They produce a lot of biomass, and they crowd out all the other plants. So they form monocultures, basically. And both of these species are perennial species, which means that they reproduce by fragmentation in this particular case. So if you break the stems, you just created a new plant that can go root somewhere else and start a new bed, which makes them really difficult to control. Okay, next slide, please. And here's the water chestnut that I was talking about. So this is a floating leaf species. So the plant actually comes up to the surface and puts out leaves that float on the surface. It looks like a little bit of lettuce or something like that when it first pops up, and then it kind of expands into these big rosettes. And over time, as water chestnut fills in and more plants are able to start germinating, it can become really, really dense to the point where it's basically impenetrable to a vessel trying to get through. And it will crowd out all the other plants, including the ones that we just talked about that crowd out other plants. So it's sort of one of the worst plants that you could have in the lake is how I see it. It spreads by these really sharp seeds or nuts that can actually, if you pick them at the wrong time of the year when they're brown and firm, they'll cut right through your hands. There's a green seed on the photo on the left. You may not be able to really see it very well, but it gives you kind of an idea of how big they are. They're about this big, and they can really hurt you if you're not careful. It's an annual species, so it reproduces entirely by seed. That might sound better at first because it's not fragmenting, but it's actually bad in a way because the seeds, if they drop, they can sit in the sediments for 5-10 years before they germinate and remain viable the whole time. So what happens is you build up a seed bank, which means you have to go back every year, take out the crop that grows that year, come back again, take out the crop that grows that year, and it becomes a management strategy that's dominated by persistence. It's not just one and done. You can't just get rid of it. Thankfully, there's not as much of this in the lake yet as there are the other plants, so I think it's at a point where we can still catch it and keep it from expanding, but action needs to be taken pretty quickly here. All right, next slide, please. All right, switching back over to the nutrient budget now. We were talking about phosphorus earlier and how that drives a lot of what we're seeing in the lake, a lot of the problems. So, based on the results that we got from this study, Freeman Lake is what's called a eutrophic water body. That just means it's nutrient rich. So it's got lots of nutrients, supports lots of plant growth. It'll support lots of algal growth as well. You'll have declining water clarity. It's just a very fertile lake. It's not as bad as a lot of lakes I've seen, so that's good. I think it's, it's certainly at the point where it can be pulled back from the edge, but it has some issues. So nutrients, these can come from outside the lake. There's all different kinds of sources. So we were talking about the Stony Brook diversion. We were talking about stormwater. The atmosphere is actually a source as well. Geese, resident waterfowl can be a source. And then there's also internal sources. So the main internal source would be the sediments, which is why we did the sediment coring. And so you add up all the different sources of phosphorus from external and internal, and you come up with an annual budget of phosphorus loading. And that's what I'm showing on the right-hand side here in that pie chart is sort of how the numbers broke out for our study. So you see Stony Brook, the diversion from Stony Brook was the single largest contributor of phosphorus to the lake, more than 230 kilograms per year of phosphorus, which is a lot. That's out of the total annual load to the lake of 300 kilograms. So 77% of the load is coming from that one source. The local watershed, which is that 600-acre area that I showed previously, right around the lake, that's about 8% of the total annual load. So, it's still substantial, but it kind of pales in comparison to Stony Brook. And most of the other sources are very small. So we have other external sources, again, that includes things like resident waterfowl and like groundwater, about 5%, and then atmosphere, which is really just rain falling into the lake, is about 4%. So that's our budget. Ideally, based on what we know about how flows come in and go out of Freeman Lake, and what we're seeing in the lake, we'd like to ideally be less than 160 kilograms, so about half of what we're getting right now. The good news is we're not so bad that if you cut the phosphorus load, you won't see any improvement. We're kind of at the point where if you cut phosphorus load, you should see some marginal improvement with every kilogram of phosphorus that you cut. So it means that you can get a lot of bang for your buck if you're able to remove phosphorus from the system. All right, next, please. And here, this was kind of an interesting result that we got. And remember I said that we installed continuous flow loggers in the outlet from the lake as well as in the Stony Brook diversion. And by doing that, we were able to measure discharge over the course of the entire study. So on the left side of these graphs, we've got Stony Brook on the left and Freeman Lake outlet on the right. That starts about November of 2023, and on the right-hand side is the end of the study, October of 2024. So this is about a year's worth of data. And what you'll see is over the winter, we have those higher flows coming through both systems. So coming in from Stony Brook, it's a little sharper, a little spikier. When you get the flow coming out of Freeman Lake, it's a little bit more rounded spikes, but you can basically see the flows are tracking each other pretty well. That means that the Stony Brook diversion is driving a lot of what you see coming out of Freeman Lake in terms of flows. What happens in the summertime is Freeman Lake drops down below the spillway. You get very little discharge coming out of it, but you still have flows coming in from Stony Brook. And that time of the year, in the summer, they tend to be thunderstorm-driven flows, really high rainfall events. And so even though the overall flows are lower, you get these spikes of flow that come in that are laden with nutrients, and they deposit the nutrients in the lake, and there's no flow going out of the lake, so the nutrients drop out right there and become usable by algae. And since temperatures are also warm in the summertime, that kind of primes the pump for algal blooms. So it's kind of interesting to see that here, just looking at the flows. This is not even showing water quality, but knowing what's going on, you can kind of see like the system is set up so that if water levels are low in the summertime and you get floods of pulses of flows coming in from the Stony Brook diversion, they could be bringing in the nutrients that create algae blooms pretty easily. All right, next slide, please. All right, so what can we do? And there's a lot of detail on this in the report. We looked at a lot of different options. We ruled some of them out pretty early on. These are just the ones that we think might have a role in helping Freeman Lake improve water quality or address aquatic plant growth in the long term. And I won't go into detail on each of them, but if anybody has any questions about any of them, I can certainly answer. But I'll just give you kind of like a brief tour of what we actually are recommending looking at going forward. So the first one is aeration or circulation, which is just what it sounds like. You're circulating water in the pond, and often you're using air to do it. Often done with diffusers that are placed at the bottom of a lake. For a system like this and Freeman Lake, you'd probably want to have pretty big ones, so they could be kind of expensive, and you'd probably need to do some studies before you put them out there. So there is some cost here on the right-hand side to doing that sort of program. But it's something that we thought, given the fact that the bottom of the lake doesn't have dissolved oxygen for most of the summer, we should think about how we could remediate that. And this is one way to do that, potentially. Algicides are just what they sound like. If you have an algae bloom and you don't want it there, algicides will kill the bloom. They don't do anything to prevent blooms, unfortunately, so they're really just sort of a Band-Aid approach. But in a pinch, you could use them to get rid of an algae bloom and just keep the pond a little clearer for a short period of time. So there's something that could be kept sort of in your back pocket for an as-needed use, but probably not something you want to go to very often. Benthic barriers, these are barriers that you just lay down on the bottom of the pond. So they're impermeable. Well, some of them are permeable, but they're basically designed to keep plants, rooted plants, from growing through them. So it's just kind of like what you would do if you were trying to smother weeds in your garden. Lay down some black plastic, put some mulch over it. It's kind of the same concept. It's very hard to do on a large scale, but on a small scale, it might be doable to keep key recreational areas open. So that's something that we thought should at least be looked at. Probably wouldn't be able to scale it up to really get control of plants across the whole lake, but could do some local spots here or there. Dilution or flushing, we actually looked at this not so much as a solution for the water quality in the lake, but as something that was recommended in 1995, the 1995 report, as something that should be kept going. Based on the results of our study, we actually don't think that the dilution or flushing from the Stony Brook diversion is having a very positive impact on the lake, particularly because of what happens in the summertime when the water levels are low. And so one thing that we recommended in our report is taking a closer look at that diversion and the sources of water that come into the lake and think about whether we want to keep that in some shape, form, or get rid of it altogether so that it's no longer a part of the system. Obviously, it's not something that you can just do. There has to be some engineering studies, and there has to be more investigation to really find out what that would look like, and then obviously something that would have to be designed and implemented. But it is one thing that we think should be looked at because we really don't think that diversion structure is providing much water quality benefit. It's actually bringing in a lot of poor water quality, and it's very difficult to control what's happening in that 27,000 acre Stony Brook watershed just in the town of Chelmsford. There's just not a lot of control over that. So again, that's kind of a big ticket item, a longer term item, but something that we thought should be looked at. Fragment barriers, if we do have the diversion continuing to flow, fragment barriers are basically just these little floating booms that capture fragments of aquatic plants that are coming in from outside the system and prevent them from making it into the lake. They don't get everything, but they get a decent fraction of them, and could be helpful for preventing new species from coming into the lake. We also looked at harvesting. So this is just physically removing plants. Hand harvesting is the simplest form, just going and pulling it out. This could be a really good way to deal with the water chestnut issue at this point, as long as hopefully it hasn't gotten too far out of hand this coming growing season. But it's just what it sounds like. It's pretty easy to do. It's very difficult to use that effectively with submerged species like fanwort or Eurasian milfoil to control those. But definitely for water chestnut, it could be a good option. Next slide, please.
Hey, Matt, sorry, just as
Yeah,
you're going
yeah.
through those, are those in order of your recommendation or not?
Right now, they're just in alphabetical order.
Thank you.
And these are separated out by in-lake, and then there's watershed actions too. So this is part two of the in-lake. This is only the second part, and then we'll have the watershed options, and that'll be kind of it for the long-term stuff. We also recommended at least looking at possibly doing some harvesting with what's called DASH, which is diver-assisted suction harvesting. It's pretty expensive per acre, but it could have a use in the future, either if you have a new infestation that comes in that hasn't gotten established yet, but there's a significant patch of it. It's a pretty efficient process compared to just setting a diver down, having them pull the plants and come back up to the surface. Basically, all this does is it allows them to have an airlift up to the surface so they can keep focused on pulling the plants, and they just have it get sucked up to the surface and put into an onion bag on the vessel that they're operating from. So that we think is an option that should at least be kept as something that could be used in the future. It's definitely not the first thing you want to try to do. It's just too expensive to try to manage big areas like that. And it's actually really hard to get DASH contractors that can work long enough to be able to make a dent in a big infestation at this point. There's just not enough of them to go around. Herbicides, these are very efficient in terms of controlling aquatic plants, but obviously something that you don't want to just go to without thinking about it. They are chemicals. We have a few that we picked out that we thought would be appropriate for some of the larger scale infestations in the lake. Right now, we're not recommending it for water chestnut because we don't think it's necessary, but there are herbicides that could be used if the water chestnut gets out of control. Again, they tend to be sort of the lowest cost per acre in terms of getting large scale control. There's both contact herbicides and systemic herbicides, and just so you kind of know the difference between the two, the contacts will work really quickly, but they basically just burn off the biomass that's above the sediment, and the roots can still persist and the plants can come back. So they can be used if you're just trying to get seasonal control of something. The systemic herbicides are great for actually killing the roots of the plant because they take the chemical that's absorbed by the leaves and move it through the plant, and it actually gets to the whole plant, kills the root crowns and everything. So if you're looking for longer term control, those tend to be the way to go. Of course, they're also more expensive. Hydro raking is another thing that we looked at. It's just an option to keep in our back pocket. Pretty expensive, again, per unit area, so it's not something you'd want to use to clear large areas. But this is really just what it sounds like. You take a big rake on a backhoe that's floating on the water and you pull the plants out or clear up the debris, whatever you want to do. Nutrient inactivation is basically adding a chemical, it's usually alum in this part of the world, to not to kill algae, but to inactivate the phosphorus in the water column or the sediments. And in this case, we're recommending that it might be useful in the water column for stripping phosphorus out from the water. And this actually helps address some of what is driving algae blooms in the lake. So in my mind, it's much better than algicides because it doesn't just kill the cells, it actually takes away the nutrients that the algae would be feeding on to grow. Again, it comes at a little bit more of a cost, but it is something to sort of think about going forward. And then finally, on the in-lake options that we recommend taking a closer look at is oxygenation. Similar in concept to aeration or circulation, except instead of circulating the water column to get air into it or adding air directly, we're actually adding oxygen, not atmospheric air, but oxygen. and focusing that oxygen on the bottom of the lake to get rid of that anoxic area that develops in the summertime. Right, next slide, please. I'm very close to being done, and then we can have a discussion. Because I know I'm throwing a lot at you. And this is very condensed from what's in the report for those who want more detail. And I won't go through all these in detail, but basically the thing that I was saying before with alum nutrient inactivation, you can do that not only in lake, but you can also add it to incoming flows into the lake. So it could be a way to deal with phosphorus coming from the Stony Brook diversion. If you're able to find a site that you could add one of these stations to, you could basically have it put a little bit of alum into the stream when you get these stormwater flows, and then it'll help take the nutrients right out of the water column before they can get to the lake and cause problems. Public education and outreach, and I know Courtney's going to touch on this a little bit too. Again, this is always something that we recommend. The more people are engaged and understand what's going on with the lake and how they can help, the better. And there can be some positive impacts from just our behavioral changes, things that we do around our house or yard that can help improve water quality in the lake. Resident waterfowl control, this is something that the town's already doing. So we just kind of recommended continuing to do that to keep the geese away from the lake as much as possible, just because what they basically do is they eat grass and the land around the lake, and then they put the nutrients right into the lake in a nice, easy-to-use form that algae really like. So we want to keep that stuff out of the lake if possible. Shoreline road maintenance, this is a continuation of something that was brought up in the 1995 report. And it's a good idea. We should just keep doing it. It's a requirement of the town's permit, basically, to operate a stormwater system. So why not recommend it, right? And stormwater controls, I mean, this is it's one line in this table, but I'm sure as everybody knows, it's actually a very complex set of different approaches. And again, these require lots of study and design, and then the construction costs are not cheap. But stormwater controls may be an approach for helping to reduce some of the stormwater inputs from the watershed as well. All right, next slide. So priority actions for the near term. We have that big, long list of things that we can look at in long term. What should we be doing as soon as possible? Well, we came up with 3 action items that we thought would be effective this year and be able to demonstrate that something's happening, something's improving here. So first on my mind is initiating a water chestnut hand harvesting program. So we gotta nip the water chestnut problem in the bud, because if that doesn't happen, it'll only get much worse and be much harder to take care of. There's some suggested areas here on the lake. These are just my ideas. These are not, nobody's saying this is what's going to happen. But hand harvesting, obviously, we would want to get all of the areas on the left there that have water chestnut. So I've kind of just circled all those areas. The second action would be targeted herbicide treatments in key recreational areas. So just starting to try herbicides out in some spots where we know we want to keep them clear for safety reasons, or to prevent fragmentation that comes if people are putting their kayaks or wading around along the shoreline there. That would only spread the plants that are there. So what I've done here is just kind of circled some of the key recreational access areas for targeted herbicide applications. So it's not a large area, wouldn't be a high cost for the first year here. And then finally, undertaking a pilot study with benthic barriers. So those, again, are the barriers that you lay down the bottom of the lake. A couple of suggested areas, they'd be very, very small areas. They cost about $3 a square foot to install, and then you've got to maintain them. So they're not cheap either. But basically the boat access at the southeast side of the lake, and then up near the beach, then on the northeast side of the lake, could be good spots to try those out and just see how they work. Next slide, please. So this is just giving you an idea of what this looks like. You hand harvest water chestnut, you end up with lots and lots of buckets of water chestnut that have to get dumped somewhere and disposed of. Next, please. Herbicides, in this case, small-scale herbicide, it'd probably be somebody coming out in a john boat for part of a day, and that would be it. So not very disruptive. The lake would probably kind of get closed down for one day just so the treatment company could do their treatment without getting in anybody's way and just as a precaution. But the herbicides that we recommended, none of them have recreational limitations on them, on the label, or restrictions, I mean. So they're pretty easy to use and shouldn't impact recreation too negatively at all. Next, please. And then the benthic barrier pilot study. So I just wanted to give you an idea of what this looks like when it's implemented. This is a pond out on Cape Cod. We didn't do this, but we're working on this pond now. And you can see the strip of barriers that they laid down in this area of really thick water lilies. So they got really good control of that species, and that's a really difficult species to control. So I think that this could work elsewhere as well on a small scale. Again, these are not huge areas. You can't do the whole lake with this, but something that I think we could try out this year. Next. This is just sort of a timeline of when you would do these things. So hand harvesting a water chestnut, you'd want to do that July, August. Herbicide spot treatments, you'd want to do at the beginning of the summertime. And then the benthic barrier pilot study, you'd have to have those in from June to October at least to get control of those areas. Next slide, please. Courtney? Yeah.
So, obviously, we have the next three, or we have the 3 action items for the next steps, but there's also things that residents and just general people can do to help increase the nutrients that are getting to the lake. So obviously, as we discussed earlier, more nutrients that go into the lake are going to contribute to accelerated growth of aquatic plants and algal blooms. So fertilizers, leaves, and pet waste are common high-nutrient stormwater pollutants. So if you decide to fertilize your lawn or garden, avoid fertilizers and cleaning products with phosphorus in them. And if you hire a lawn care contractor, you speak with them about using phosphorus-free fertilizers. You can try to introduce more native plants if you have a garden area. They typically require no fertilizer and minimal watering because they're adapted to this area and soil. You want to pick up after your pets and dispose of the waste properly in the trash. You never want to dump that waste down into storm drains, which is a problem we have through town. Obviously, hopefully the people who are doing that don't realize that it goes to the nearest body of water, but that contributes high pollutant loads, high bacteria, and trash. You want to avoid feeding the waterfowl. We obviously have the waterfowl programs in place to try and reduce the amount of geese and other waterfowl in our lakes, but feeding them has a few negative impacts. You never want to dump, store, or stockpile yard waste, including grass clippings and leaves within 100 linear feet of a water body or wetland. You want to dispose of yard waste properly at a commercial waste facility or compost in a location away from wetlands and storm drains. And as far as disposing of yard waste, we actually offer free curbside leaf pickup events now. And you want to try to keep paved areas and storm drains clear of leaves. And so using zero phosphorus lawn fertilizer, all containers of fertilizer have 3 numbers on the bag or the container. The middle one is phosphorus, so you want to look for a fertilizer with a 0 as the middle number. It's actually against Massachusetts law to use phosphorus, except for when soil tests say that you need phosphorus for a lawn or non-agricultural turf or for a newly established lawn. So basically, a lawn only needs phosphorus that first year after it's been seeded or sodded, and then after that, you don't need it. So it's just going to be excess phosphorus that ends up in our waterways, which is the biggest nutrient of concern in Chelmsford. So definitely look for a 0 if you decide to fertilize. And if your yard does require fertilizer, you can still help reduce water pollution and improve water quality by using the phosphorus-free, so the 0 is the middle number. And then you can choose to spot treatment and only apply fertilizer to the problem areas rather than the entire yard. Check the weather before you apply your fertilizer and avoid application before a rain event. Don't over-apply, just use it sparingly as needed. And never dump or store that fertilizer or the yard waste around the wetlands or storm drains. And you can also leave grass clippings in your yard as a natural fertilizer or compost them as long as they're away from the wetlands. And then, as we said earlier, to avoid feeding waterfowl. Not only does it attract more waterfowl, but it can lead to poor nutrition of the birds. It spreads disease. It's an unnatural behavior. It increases more waterfowl waste, increased pollution, and delayed migration. So it's not good for the birds. It's not good for the body of water. So it's definitely something to avoid.
Okay, this is the last slide, I promise, and it's all about the money. So, some of the numbers that you saw posted in those tables are big, or they're recurring numbers. They're not big in one year, but they have to be done every year. So where do you get funding for this kind of thing? There are a lot of sources of funding. Some of them are a little bit uncertain right now, but I'm going to present them anyway because I think they'll be around in some shape or form, hopefully in the coming years. But locally, there's the Community Preservation Act. So there's a Community Preservation Committee in town, committee. And there are funds that can be used for preservation of open space or recreation. In other towns, those funds have been used to support lake management projects. Typically can't be used for maintenance projects going on and on and on, but a one-time thing. It's possible that you could secure funding for that. State funds or state programs even. There's the DCR Weed Watcher program. So this is actually just a training program for volunteers who want to know more about aquatic invasive plants, know how to spot them and what to do when they see them. So I always try to recommend that. There's municipal vulnerability preparedness action grants. So the town has an MVP plan. These are for climate resilience projects, which could include a lot of the water quality improvement stuff that we're talking about. There's the Stormwater MS4 Municipal Assistance Grant. And again, this is funding to support intermunicipal coordination in terms of complying with the requirements of the MS4 permit, stormwater permits. Typically, I think it's awarded to groups of communities. There's water quality monitoring grants that are actually targeted specifically to nonprofit organizations. So they're not even really open to municipalities. It's really for nonprofit organizations. So if that's something that there was interest in starting, that could be a funding source for getting a program up and running for volunteer monitoring. And there's federal resources. And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is some of the best ones for being used to implement lake management activities. There's the Clean Water Act 604B program, which is the water quality planning grants. So these are for finding sources, identifying them, and perhaps doing some conceptual design on how you're going to address them. Typically, those grants are about $50,000, $60,000. The Section 319 grants are to then take the information that you either gathered in the 604B grant or through some other watershed study and design, permit, and implement those. So that's sort of the implementation side of things. And then there's also this organization called the New England Water Infrastructure Network that's been set up to assist municipalities with water resources issues. And they can provide technical assistance to municipalities to help deal with drinking water, wastewater, stormwater issues all throughout New England. And I think that is the last slide.
That is.
So thank you very much for having me here tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matt and Courtney.
Also, quickly, I have a sign-in sheet. If anyone wants to be added to the Freeman Lake email distribution list to learn about updates to this project, feel free to write down your name and email. I will add you.
Taking questions at this point?
Any of them chemicals affect the fish?
You're talking about the herbicides?
Yeah.
Yeah, all those herbicides have to go through a process where they're tested in laboratories on different species to make sure that they don't have an undue impact on them. I would never say that any chemical is completely safe to use anywhere you want it to, but when used in accordance with the label and applied as they are supposed to be, they should not have a negative impact on aquatic life, other than the plants that they're targeted to.
Yeah.
Hi, Matt. Peter.
Peter, I'm sorry, could you,
I'm gonna stand here because I can't stand.
Okay.
Sit here. I can't stand more than 30 seconds, I'm sorry.
no, that's okay.
But I can talk loud. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Matt, thank you. And your team and Courtney and Christine and everybody else. There's a lot of data in the report, which leads me to my first question. Do we have a process
Peter.
for people
Peter,
making comments?
your name for the record.
Oh, I said my first name, Peter Spawn, for the record. Sorry. So is there a process for people to submit questions or comments on the report? How's that gonna work?
We don't have a set time frame right now. We could establish one. People could email me questions and comments. I could post that on the website where the report is posted on the town's website.
Okay, because there were a few
I think
people.
2 weeks maybe, but
Yeah, we'll do end of February or beginning of March, and I do believe my email is on that website, but I will make sure it's there.
So comments to you, Courtney?
Yeah,
Yeah, because
I'll
a few
compile
people in
them.
the room I was talking to before had some, questions or comments
yeah, that'd be great,
on the data.
and we can compile that.
The second thing I wanted to mention, Matt, I loved your example about dissolved oxygen problems on trout, but for those in the audience that aren't lake people, that low dissolved oxygen affects all the critters, right, including the little ones in the mud that are part of the food web that results in fish and eagles flying over the lake, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the whole food web. Yes, it does. So basically anything that's below, I think it was about 13 feet, at some point is without dissolved oxygen. So that means really nothing can live there except for organisms that are able to survive in anaerobic conditions, which is mainly bacteria.
Right, so a bad thing for our lake.
Right.
And then just quickly, the herbicides in the report, you didn't mention this, but they are mostly targeted at the invasives, or do they kill everything?
Yeah, that's a good question. Some of them are very, very selective. So I think one of the ones we gave as an example of something that could be used is Procellacor. That one will pretty much only work on Eurasian milfoil at the dosage that they would use.
Yeah.
It won't kill anything else, even if you wanted it to. There are others that are a little bit broader spectrum. The flumioxazin is the one, also known as Clipper, or I think Flumi Clean is another brand name of it, trade name. That's a much more broad spectrum herbicide. So the way that you control what that affects is you limit where you apply it. So you try to go for the beds that you're really trying to target. It won't take out everything, but it'll take out a lot more than the Procellacor would.
And then, I'm sorry, I'll make this quick. What % of the vegetation in the lake is invasives? Now, you may not have actually calculated that, but are the invasives like half of, well, let me back up. Stuff is supposed to grow in the lake, so the goal is not weed-free. The weeds, the native stuff are supposed to be there, right, to support fish habitat, correct?
That's right, yes.
And the problem is the invasives more or less grow faster and crowd out the stuff we want, right? So, but what are we talking here in this lake? Is half the plants invasives, 10%, 90%? Do you have any, even if it's just an off the top of your head,
Yeah,
guess that we won't quote you on, but
Right.
what are we looking at here? Is it like,
yeah. So I mean, we look at both the aerial extent of the plants, so how much ground they cover essentially in the lake, and we also look at how much of the water column they take up. And I'd say probably close to about 50% if you're just looking at the cover. But if you're looking at how much of the water column they take up, it's probably more than that, just because the invasives tend to be really high biomass. They put out a lot of vegetation, and so they really kind of dominate the water column.
So in terms of habitat protection and fish for recreation, let's just use fish. Fish to catch, fish to feed the eagles and whatnot. I know your study didn't look at this specifically, but is there any broad comment you can make for the folks here? What your recommendations would do for the fish population, not. I'm sorry, probably should have stumbled up. But do you have any broad sense at this point for, let's say we implemented the recommendations and did it year over year, because it's not, there's a maintenance piece. What does that do to the fish? Does it liberate them and there's gonna be much better fishing? And I realize that's not fair, because that's not really what we asked you to do. But, lakes, like, there'd be a huge benefit, wouldn't there?
Yeah, I mean, so let's go back to the oxygenation or aeration concept. That alone, if you think about it, you're basically taking 30-40% of the lake that's dead during the summer right now and saying that can be fish habitat. So just by adding that as usable fish habitat, you're improving both the number of fish that you have and the diversity of different fishes that you can have. Clearing out some of these really thick plant beds and turning them into more usable habitat that still has cover but isn't a monoculture of an invasive species will also provide benefits to a lot of different fish species. I can't really go into specifics about
Yeah, I realize it wasn't
the whole
fair.
fish street. No, it was a good question, but yeah, in general, there should be positive impacts.
All right, thank you.
Sure thing.
So, David Kuntz, conservation agent here in town. So, you mentioned that, or the study shows that 77% of the phosphorus loading in a lake comes from outside the local watershed, or it comes from the Stony Brook watershed. So presumably that's coming from through the Stony Brook diversion.
That's correct. Yes.
So would it make sense to do a plot of the reduction in that nutrient loading as a function of the amount of alum that's applied at the diversion? Would it make sense to look at that, do that kind of a plot?
It could. Yes. Yeah. I think there are a few things that would go into a sort of a feasibility assessment of that option, and one would be, yes, how much can you remove and what would you need to do it?
Because, I mean, that, just in theory, that would seem to make the most sense, or potentially the most effective way to combat the nutrient loading is and I think you mentioned this, to try and address what's coming in from the rest of the watershed.
Right. Yes, that's right. And it has been done in a couple of spots in Massachusetts. It's not something that I would say is widespread yet, but there are a couple of operating dosing stations elsewhere. And it's been effective in those areas. Any other questions?
Yes. Dick Hadley, North Chelmsford. A couple of things that I didn't see get addressed that I'm concerned about. As far as the algae growth in the middle of the lake, I didn't see anything on any of those charts that showed anything in the middle of the lake. There's probably well over a football field size algae bloom or milfoil bloom or whatever it is that's really choking the middle of that lake because it's fairly shallow. And I'm just wondering, is that part of what we're talking about here? Or I noticed you're just talking about the perimeter. And where the inlet comes in, I know that water chestnut thing, I've been up there, and it's choked beyond belief, because I can remember not too many years ago, you could paddle a boat up that canal, up to get to the canal that feeds in for the Stony Brook diversion, and there was nothing. There was nothing growing anywhere in there. It was pristine. And now it's nearly impossible to get up through there. So I'm just wondering, are we going to be able to address both the inlet, which I guess somebody was saying that was good because it filtered out some phosphorus or something, having all that, acting like a filter, I guess, when the water coming in. I don't know how true that is, but the main concern was in the middle of the lake, when that gets growing out there, if you were on a paddleboard and you fell off your paddleboard out in the middle of the lake, you'd possibly drown. So you better have a life jacket on because it literally would, you probably couldn't move if you fell into that. It's that thick, which is unbelievable. And my other concern was the Stony Brook diversion. Is there any plan or is anybody responsible for any kind of maintenance to the Stony Brook diversion? Because I've been down there several times looking at that over the past few months. And it's in dire need of some type of repair, maintenance, replacement. I mean, something needs to happen up there because there's just been debris flowing down from everywhere, getting into that thing. The boards that maintain the water level for that Stony Brook diversion, which also maintains the water level for the lake, the boards are all rotted out. And the last time they were replaced was probably, I'm going to say 15 or 20 years ago, and they lasted that long. But now they're all broken down and to the point where the lake is actually, at certain times, the lake is actually flowing backwards up the Stony Brook diversion over the waterfalls because no maintenance has been done to that in a long, long time. And the amount of debris that's actually collected at that point that needs to be repaired is unbelievable. And then just on a side note, after the water comes down Stony Brook and goes over those waterfalls, it goes underneath the railroad tracks. And there's 4 giant culverts, well, giant, they're probably 6-foot tubes that go underneath the railroad tracks. That hasn't been maintained in a very long time also, so that's also very blocked. And I can remember when the lake went out back in 1977. Was it 71? It went back in, yeah, it went back, yeah. Anyway, what had happened, if anybody remembers how this worked, we had a super heavy flow, and the water was coming down over the waterfalls, trying to get underneath the railroad tracks. Those 6-foot tubes were all clogged. The water couldn't get out underneath the railroad tracks fast enough, which caused that whole area to flood, and there was no waterfall up there. It was even. It was actually even with the grates of the walkway that goes across. That whole thing was just even, and then it started overflowing into the canal, and it breached the man-made canal road in 3 places, and that's what ended up overflowing the lake because the water couldn't get out fast enough. So my point to this whole thing is something has to be done to maintain the diversion and the culverts going under the tracks. So I'm just wondering, is anybody responsible for doing that? I don't know if that probably doesn't fall into your thing, but it directly impacts the lake.
Sure. So we are actually confirming ownership, especially of those culverts, and part of that diversion, just to confirm ownership between the town and the railroad company.
Well, ownership is fine, but the town, I think, ultimately is going to be responsible for maintaining that. So I'm not sure where the ownership issue even.
Well, if the railroad owns it, then they have to maintain it.
They would definitely own the culverts going under the tracks.
Right.
But I'd be surprised if they own the diversion control.
So we're confirming that with our town council.
So is that something that's going to get addressed like soon?
Well, the ownership would be addressed hopefully soon. As far as any type of plans for restoration, that would have to be designed and permitted, so that would take time.
Well, from what I can see, all that needs to happen is it's about probably 12 boards that need to get replaced that would probably solve 99% of the problem as far as the lake is concerned. But then somewhere in your proposal, I heard you saying that there was talk of somehow, I don't know if you were talking about cutting back the flow from the Stony Brook diversion into the lake to cut down on the phosphorus or whatever was coming in. Is that Is that something that's being discussed as far as actually changing the level of the lake, as far as the water coming in? Is that something that was talked about?
At this point, it's just an idea of, so we've basically just identified that diversion is a source of lots of nutrients, right?
Absolutely.
And probably some invasive plants that
27,000
are coming
acres
in.
worth. Yeah.
And so it's more of a conceptual idea of, well, I think the prior report assumed that it was a good thing that it was flowing in because it flushed the lake out.
Right. That was my thought originally, too.
But it seems like maybe that's not really the case, and so there's different options, right? Maybe holding back water when it's really dirty water that you don't want coming in.
Right.
And when the flows are relatively clean, but that requires some sort of
That would be
mechanism
one tricky thing to
do
figure
that.
out.
Or just keeping it all out together, but then you have to make sure you have enough groundwater and other flows to sustain the lake at the level that you
Well, I
want.
guess
So
that leads to another question. Is there any spring feeding into that lake? Is there anything besides the Stony Brook diversion that feeds that lake cleanly? We definitely have lots of springs.
Oh, yeah.
So if we shut down that Stony Brook diversion, bringing all those nitrates into the lake, it would still maintain its level, we think? Is that a possibility?
Have to be studied, right?
It's an interesting idea.
that's something that I think would
I mean, to have
want to
a
look at.
spring-fed lake would be great. I think the fish would love that.
It would change a lot about the lake, and there could be very good things that happen. There's obvious things that would be better.
Right.
You wouldn't have to worry about the possibility that you have fragments of invasive species coming from Stony Brook and floating into the lake.
Well, it's funny when you say Stony Brook, because just another side note of this, I've been monitoring this Stony Brook diversion for probably a year. I'm going up there all the time. I'm taking pictures and videos, and I'm watching this thing, and I'm like, oh my God, somebody's got to maintain this thing, because something's not right here. But one day I went up there, and there was a lot of water coming. The water's coming like there's no tomorrow. It's filling up the lake. It's going over the dam. It hadn't rained in like a month or 6 weeks, and I'm like, all of a sudden, we're not having any flow going over the dam, and then this one particular week, all of a sudden, there's all this water coming into the lake, and the dam's flowing like crazy, and I'm like, we had no rain, and where's this water coming from? Well, I happen to have a friend that lives up in Forge Village, up in, what's the other lake up there? Forge Pond. And I says, are they lowering that lake or something? Because all of a sudden, this water's, and anyway, my friend happened to not be in the area, so she didn't find out what it was, but that's the only thing I could think of was somehow somebody's lowering the level of their lake, and it's coming into our lake because there was no rain. But it was surprised me because with the Stony Brook diversion having the boards out, the canal was actually flowing backwards. The water was flowing out of the lake, up the canal, and over the falls.
If Swain Pond drained, is that where it would?
No, it had nothing to do with Swain. That's like way downstream.
Because we know Swain Pond.
When was this?
Now, this would have been like millions of gallons of water.
When was it? 12 million.
I could probably look in my text and find out, but it was,
November, the North Water Department emptied their water tank, and then
that's possible too.
And then August, the Swain,
Yeah.
the tank on Swain Road, they emptied that by half.
Would
for
the one
maintenance.
on Swain Road empty into the lake?
Yeah, we got half of it in our lake and half in their catch basin. in
Really?
Swain. Yes.
So maybe that was the answer then. Maybe that was, I'm talking a lot of water. I mean,
Yeah.
if the pipe is this big and it's flowing into there, there was a lot of water coming into that lake.
They really should let conservation know.
And I went up to the diversion and the water was coming down from the diversion. So there was a lot of water, so. Anyway, my main point is that diversion needs to get repaired somehow. Even if we were gonna if we were gonna stop the flow from the diversion, one of the things that would have to happen is that thing would have to get repaired in order to do that. So if that was an idea, that would also play in, so.
Yeah.
So I
Was this
guess
in the-
that's a question for
Was this in the
Christine.
morning?
What's that?
Was this in the morning?
That big
So
flow.
there was an incident where there was millions of gallons from a beaver dam that gave up,
Up near Scotty Hollow.
and there was, we estimated about over millions of gallons.
think
And
it
it
would've-
was in the fall, it was like September, and it was in the morning, so just curious if that that could have been another
Could
reason.
be anything in that
Yeah.
long Stony
Yeah.
Brook watershed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean, there's 27,000 acres, so somebody did something. Maybe everybody emptied their swimming pool or something, but
Yeah.
there was a lot of water coming down.
Yeah.
Anyway, so my other main thing at the beginning was that football-sized field of vegetation in the middle of the lake. I didn't see it on the map, and that seemed to be a big concern. So I don't know if that's something that can be harvested or one of the other methods, but I just wanted to make note that it wasn't on that map, because we're talking a very large area. So, anyway, that's it. Thank you.
There was like all kinds of talk that it looked like an island in the middle of the lake about 3 years ago. It was at its worst, you know. So as, if anybody thinks,
We've got some
Christine?
questions if it's.
okay, sure.
Christine, what do you or you and David envision? Like, what is the next step here? Are we going to try to address those three priorities, or like, how are
Sure.
we looking longer term at the big aeration
Yeah.
issue?
So I think immediately, and that's why we wanted to have this meeting in February. I know we just got a draft of the report, but we wanted to present this information because we would have to start moving on some of the immediate recommendations with permitting. And so, with our budget that we have about $15,000 to $25,000 budgeted. Closer to 15, but I could probably have that go towards 25. That limits, so basically so our goal is to try to get those three things.
try to do those three.
Yeah. If numbers come in high, we might not be able to do all three, maybe it's two, but it's important to treat especially the beach, so making sure we do the spot treatments. The water chestnut seems to be, since that's new, it seems like if we don't address that now, then it's going to become a bigger problem. So that's why we recommended, and TRC recommended, having that be a short-term solution. So we would want to put our money towards really the water chestnut and the spot treatment as much as we can do, particularly the beach, in the three areas highlighted. As far as a lot of the other recommendations, we also want to try to seek some type of funding for it. And so CPC was brought up, so maybe we pursue that for some of the studies, particularly I think the Stony Brook diversion study is really interesting just because it's so many, the phosphorus loading, 77% in the 27,000 acres that's coming into the pond. I think it's worth at least a study to see, but that has a cost to us, whether it be through a CPC or grant opportunities. And I think we had talked about that the 604B was potentially a good candidate for that study. So over really the next 6 months, it's really those three action items, the short term, and then starting to think about what could we apply for grants or CPC funding. I guess I wouldn't want to start with too many studies. I think we maybe want to start with one or two. And
From what was presented, and David, I don't know if you want to chime in, but is the aeration, I know it's one of the most expensive things. Is that a priority that we really should figure out how to address? You identified three near-term priorities that are within our funding ability. And I guess my question is, what's the priority that's not within our ability right now that you would recommend we focus most on to get funding for?
so I think when we had talked about this, and that's how do we get funding and grants, it would be difficult to receive grants for aeration, correct? Potentially?
That would have to be CPC funding?
Potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, vegetation control and aeration probably would be very difficult to fund with grants.
But my question isn't about funding. My question is, forget how much it costs. What's the next priority? If money weren't an object, what is the most important thing for us to address?
So when I read the report, I guess I was really surprised about about the amount that's coming into the lake. So I looked at that as
From
probably,
Stony Brook?
Yeah, from Stony Brook. I looked at that as probably one of the most important next phases to study, at least to see.
Do you agree with that, David? Yeah, thank you.
And can I add one more thing? So, this is probably not the time or place to get involved in this kind of discussion, but just do want to remind you, you probably haven't forgotten that when the town last applied to put herbicides in Freeman Lake, Conservation Commission issued an order of conditions that was appealed. We even tried reaching a compromise to just treat the beach. And even that was opposed by the neighbors or the residents of the lake. So I think you really got to talk to them first, make sure that they're going to agree to even a spot treatment. Otherwise, I don't think there's really any sense or any point of going back to the Conservation Commission and getting approval to do that if it's only going to be appealed again and only then dropped as a course of action. So it's the only comment I have.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because, thank you, because I want to know what the next steps were, Virginia, so you kind of brought us there. Appreciate that. So I would say about 2.5 years ago, we thought this was going to be treated, no problem. We got the grant, and we were glad it was going to happen. And to your point that it was opposed, and I don't want to open that debate, but it seemed like it was a small but loud opposal. So, and it seemed to me, and that's why I think there's so much attention on this, that more residents actually wanted it to be treated than not, and that's why the money and the efforts went to this, survey and all that, and I appreciate Matt and all this, but now we got to know how we going to make this, fix. How we going to go about this fix? So I don't want to be spinning my wheels either, because we thought this was going to be happening a few years ago. The other thing is about next steps. It's about bandwidth too. We're all volunteers. Anybody that wants to make sure that this keeps honest and a hot topic, that's where the neighbors and the residents volunteer to work together to make sure there's a solution, there's funding, there's grants, and there's efforts there. So if anybody wants to work with Christine and work through this committee to give us updates as a subcommittee, that's what, that's what can be done. It's just a matter of the folks that want to get something done really need to step up.
Yeah, and if I can just speak to the treatment, I guess now we have a lot of options on the table, and so I don't see potentially treatment as being the solution every year moving forward. It's just with the funding that we do have for this year, I probably don't have the funding to do something other than spot treatment at the beach, when you combine that with a water chestnut, and when you combine that with that pilot study. So if we do not do spot treatment, then I guess I don't know how I'm going to treat the beach or some type of, I know hydro raking, but that was about $20,000.
Please come to the mic and.
I'm Peter Severance from North Chelmsford, and I was the person who appealed the decision. So, and Mass DEP took that appeal in part because there was no study, and now there's a very good study. I have some questions and comments on it. But also there was no demonstration that the benefits would outweigh the risks or the detriments. And so I'm still going through the report, and I'll try to get my comments in quickly. Spot treatments, did you take a look at the circulation in the lake at all?
No, we didn't measure circulation, no.
Okay, that would be important to know. That was brought up in past meetings and is a concern. I want to clarify something about the hypolimnion and oxygen depletion. Stratification of lakes is a natural physical phenomenon, correct?
Yes.
Has nothing to do with nutrients.
That's true.
And it has nothing to do with non-native plants.
Correct.
So and Freeman Lake is a Class B water. Correct?
I didn't look at the classification, but I would assume it is because it's not a water supply.
It's a warm water fisheries. It is not a cold water fisheries. So oxygen levels that we care about for what the state has determined Freeman Lake is 5 degrees, not 6 degrees. We're not going to have trout in Freeman Lake. Just so you all know, that's not what you manage the lake for. It's not going to happen. That's just, the physics of the lake. So cyanobacteria, There's probably 15 species in Massachusetts, and they're native. So we're not going to get rid of cyanobacteria, correct?
Well, I guess I would just counter that just because something is native doesn't mean it's necessarily good for the lake or for people. So
Well, no,
if it's a public health
agree.
issue, I think
Right,
we
but-
generally recommend that it be managed. Yeah.
Okay. And we're not going to get rid of the non-native, no matter what we do, we're not going to get, even if we closed off Stony Brook, we're not going to purge the lake of the non-native species. Do you agree with that?
Typically, when you have an advanced infestation, it's a control program. So you're trying to manage the species that's there. It's very hard to eradicate once something's become established. So, yeah.
Right. And there's no guarantee that we're not going to lose native plants in the lake if we're doing widespread herbicide treatment. Is that correct?
There's no guarantee that there won't be any effect, but any herbicide program that is responsibly designed would be designed to favor the native plants that are, either by geography or by the selection of the herbicides, or by the timing of the application, so that the native plant community would benefit from the treatment overall, and the invasives would be the ones that are targeted and decline.
Right. I'd like to learn more about how targeted new herbicides are. I'll just submit the rest in writing, so thanks.
Thank you.
Gloria Clancy, Russell Road. It seems that we inherit a lot of our problems from towns. Stony Brook goes through all the way up to Boxborough, you said. Has conservation or anybody been in contact with conservation from these other towns to see if they're doing anything on their part about all this phosphorus, et cetera? Because we're inheriting it, but we can't do anything about it if it just keeps coming.
Well, I don't know if we've been in direct contact, but all those towns are also subject to the Massachusetts MS4 permit, which became a lot more strict in 2018. So all the towns, and is actually about to become more strict again as the next 5-year permit comes out. The draft is currently out. So all the municipalities, urbanized municipalities in Massachusetts, are taking steps to reduce pollutant loads coming off in their stormwater in general. And they all are required to do large public education outreach initiatives like we've been doing as well. So hopefully with these combined statewide efforts, it will help reduce phosphorus, but it's hard to pinpoint, one town or one place where that could, you could stop huge, large or significant amounts of phosphorus. It's just, since it's such a large area, just kind of seeping in everywhere. But theoretically, as these programs are more and more developed, and it's a kind of rolling requirements, that phosphorus loads coming into our waterways should decrease.
I'm sure he has a comment. Thank you.
So, and I don't want to sound discouraging or anything, but I live in Boxborough, actually on the Conservation Commission in Boxborough. And there's actually a large part of the portion of the Stony Brook watershed that's in Boxborough is in an industrial, commercially zoned area that the town is currently trying to encourage development in. So again, not to be discouraging, but I don't think that's exactly going to help.
No.
The nutrient loading from upstream in the watershed. So, I also have to admit that we're not consciously doing anything to try and, reduce, runoff of nutrients. But what Courtney said is certainly true. We still do have to abide by the MS4, and certainly I will try to put that on the radar screen, of town officials and others who are concerned.
Thank you.
If I could just add, Peter, again, Peter Swan, I mean, this is a problem nationwide, right? It's not just Stony Brook and Chelmsford, it's everywhere, and the phosphorus basically comes from lawns, and pet waste. I mean, there's other sources, but, so just picture everybody's lawn on the whole Stony Brook watershed, and that's what we're talking about. And what Courtney is saying is great. I mean, that is programs underway to try to fix the problem, but it's not gonna fix it anytime soon, because it's a big problem. But that's why we in Chelmsford, pay for the DPW stormwater team to help with that, and other towns are doing the same thing.
Thank you. Bill?
Hey, Matt, couple quick questions. I was asked by one of the lake residents to ask, would propellers from a motorboat help or hurt the invasive species? Like, would churning them up be a good thing, or does that create even more plants once you've churned them up?
Yeah, so for the two species that I profiled first, the Eurasian milfoil and the fanwort, that would definitely not be a good thing. They spread by fragmentation.
Okay.
Some of the other plants, it may not make as big a difference.
Okay.
I don't think that would ever really help, other than it might. You had a lot of boats going through with the propellers, they would clear an area temporarily because it'd chop it all up and you could have like a channel. But there's better ways to do it than
In the end, it could
chopping
be
it up with the
worse.
propeller. Right.
Okay. Really quick, lead carry, phosphorus? Sorry, I'm a finance guy. I don't know.
What was the first part of that? Lead?
Carry phosphorus?
Does it carry phosphorus?
Is it in it?
I'm not aware of lead carrying phosphorus.
Okay. It's not my area of
But
expertise.
it carries lead, which is also not good.
Could that create issues in the lake as well? Could that lead to any of this stuff?
Certainly, if there was a lot of lead coming in from a particular source, yes.
Okay,
And air pollution back in the 70s, when everybody was using leaded fuels, you can see deposition of lead in sediments. So
Okay.
it left a mark.
Thanks. Christine, one quick question for you in your point on spot treatment for the beach and stuff. How does it work if a majority of the residents are in favor of spot treatment, but a minority are not in favor?
I guess that's what happened last time. It still has to go through the permitting process. I don't know if David, it goes through the permitting process and.
Well, and all it takes is 10 residents to appeal.
Okay. So 10?
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, though, from, conversations we had when we were dealing with this appeal, it did seem like the primary focus of a lot of those residents were to get a study to better understand our options. So we're hoping that now we have this study, we're not just blindly, or, not blindly, but it's more thought out, our approach of adding these herbicides. We're hoping that that'll be more open.
Well, yes, and that was at least from my perspective, the reason that the RFP, the proposal for the study included 3 public input sessions. Definitely needs to be a public input session where the residents are encouraged to express vocally how they feel about the herbicide treatment.
Yeah.
I think that's crucially important.
Yeah, and David, maybe you can answer this too. I know last time, when it was appealed, the Mass DEP didn't really reject it or approve it. They put it back in our hands to try and reach a compromise, which was this study.
Yes.
If it happened again and it was appealed, could we still try to push it through with DEP, or would we probably come back to the drawing board?
I can only give my personal opinion, and certainly in no way, shape, or form speaking for the Conservation Commission. But my opinion is that DEP would very likely approve in this case, would have affirmed the commission's decision. If a future decision, the commission were to deny it, I think DEP would then likely override the denial. It's certainly been my experience, and I've paid attention to a number of treatment projects over the years that were opposed in other towns. That's just my opinion.
So if there was a lot of support, residential support, and we decided to let DEP make that ruling, we could see what happened afterwards.
If it's appealed, that's most likely the process.
Yeah.
And DEP might say, as they did before, well, try and work it out,
Yeah.
locally. But if that just can't happen, DEP will be required to make a decision. Again, I think
Okay.
it'll be most likely an approval.
All right, yeah.
So and also in the theme of next steps, I appreciate you bringing this to the committee because it's part of North Chelmsford, but I also feel like because I know it also started with the Conservation Commission too. I think maybe the next discussion about this probably should be in their purview, not the Vinyl Square, but that's what I wanted to ask you, is that what would we do to make the final decision to proceed? Because I feel like your expertise is better than ours, and it probably should be in that form, not that I'd probably attend as well, but I just wanted to put that out there, Christine.
Sure,
Whatever you
so
think.
a lot of the next session, the 3 steps would have to go through the permitting process. So that would probably be through conservation. As far as input, like I said, we will update our website to indicate a timeline. I'm thinking probably by either end of February or first week in March to submit any comments. And then we will then also provide a updated report. We also, I guess I haven't thought how to address the specific questions, whether respond individually to those residents, or we could also do some type of summary of updates made to the document or considerations made. But I guess the thing is that we're getting close to time is of the essence in some of this too, because we have to permit it, get quotes. And we, looking at June, that's not that far away. So we would probably likely start the process for the permitting after we hear, wait till it gets the draft report or the final report. So by March, we really need to be headed towards permitting. So public input session would likely be at the Conservation Commission. And we can publicize that through our social media as well. And we can send it to an email.
Publicize it as well, but I feel like they're
Yeah.
more equipped to be able to really, host that. Thank you.
I'm Alan Beebe, North Chelmsford. I have experience removing water chestnuts from bodies of water. It's a little bit, there's some logistics involved. You need a canoe, at least one canoe, 4 waste baskets, laundry baskets. You need to have people wearing life jackets. In some cases, organizations that do this, like the Assabet, Sudbury, Concord River Group, they have a waiver you need to sign. So they have an annual water chestnut pull. In addition to pulling the plants out, you also need to dispose of them on the shoreline. Above the high water mark, they decompose very quickly. You do have to watch out for the seeds, which do have the sharp spikes. I have experience with having one embedded in a boot. You also may pull up a crayfish or 2 that hide in some of the bottom material. So I'd be willing to help put together a group if anybody wants to do that next summer.
Thank you. I was going to suggest if you would like to volunteer, I appreciate you doing it for us.
Sign you up.
I can do
Christine,
it,
sign
I can
'em up.
see doing it next year, but I'm not going to guarantee I'll be able to continue doing it. That's the problem. You got to have a persistent, over 10 years of watching for this. Now, I'd also like to point out perhaps the major origin of where we're seeing the water chestnut is actually coming up in the impoundment that's above 11 School Street. That's a large reservoir with a dam. The water is very slow flowing. There's a huge infestation of water chestnut filling in there. Almost to the point where in the past I've seen a great blue heron walking on the top. Not here at Stony Brook, but in another area. So that's private property. I don't know if there's an owner yet, because it was for sale. The logistics of actually that would be a great place to pull out a lot of the infestation. That would help monitor or control the flow into Stony Brook and hence into perhaps Freeman Lake. Also, Canadian geese may have brought in a lot of the water chestnuts that you're seeing. And I believe the area that's got the heaviest infestation in the south, part of it is conservation property, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, not only do we appreciate your help recording our meetings here and in town, appreciate you cleaning up on Freeman Lake as well. We've made a lot of progress here tonight, Christine. Thank you.
Is there still, there's a question back there.
Again, I'm Gary. I've lived in this town for over 50 years, close to 60 actually. But the problem is, in the summertime, it's not just around, the lily pads and stuff, it's the weeds that are in the middle of that lake. I want to tell you what happened to me about 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. I used to live over by the dam, up on that hill, up on Mallory Street. And I was fishing, and I fell out of my boat. And I was fully clothed. And I thought I was going to drown. I couldn't get to my boat. My boat wasn't even from here to those barrels away. And I tried to get to him, and I couldn't. In my panic and screaming for help, I accidentally kicked off one of my sneakers. And when I did that, I felt a little freedom in that right foot. And I said, oh my God. So I kicked off my left sneaker and had a little more freedom. And I started to creep a little bit towards that boat a little bit. And I finally took off my shirt, and that helped me. And I ended up taking off my pants. Toughest thing to do when you're wrapped in weeds, let me tell you. And all that process took like 5 or 10 minutes. I finally got to that boat, and that saved my life. Now, we had a drowning. I think it was last summer, but I'm not exactly sure when.
2 falls ago.
Was it 2 falls ago? He was right when he said, if you fall out of that boat in the middle of Freeman Lake, now I saw your diagram, it didn't show, 80% of that lake was weeds that year.
Yeah.
When he fell in, he did not have a chance. And it brought me back to what happened to me years ago. It's very serious. If you are out there, and I'm not talking about the lily pads or stuff, but I do have a question that, we have 2 ways of doing this. I guess one is chemicals, which some people are against, and I'm not gonna say what side I'm on just yet. But, or we do nothing, because that's where we're at right now. I did hear somebody say something about a big rake on a machine that can pull the stuff out, but I could be wrong. I don't know. I'm just an average person, but that to me is like raking my yard. Mowing my lawn. It's just gonna come back every 2 weeks. Whereas chemicals, if I were to put weed killer in my yard, it usually lasts 3 to 4, 5 or 6 months. Is chemicals bad for the fish? Yeah, I think they could be. But is the way things are now bad for the fish? I think it is. Which way do we go? I do have the question, I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. Which way would you go, sir?
Well, it's not my lake, so it's not my decision
I
to
just
make,
want your opinion, that's all.
but, when it comes to lake management, having a good balance between some plant cover to provide habitat for fish and other aquatic organisms and open water is better than having just a field of plants that nobody can get through and fish can't swim through, and so a good balance is what I would recommend.
You're going with chemicals, I feel that.
Oh, as far as the methodology for getting
We
there?
just want an opinion so we can, because I'm like this.
Yeah.
And I'm just looking for a professional's opinion on what direction, because I don't think doing nothing is good for the fish either.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, so like the hydro rake that you mentioned before, that's definitely not something that you want to do over a large area. It's not going to give a lot of control, and it won't give sustained control. It's really more for cleaning up small areas like along a beach or shoreline.
Now, I know Gumpus Pond in Pelham and Arlington Pond out there, I think it's by Kenny Billy, they have these gates that open up and have a drawdown of like 6, 7, 8 feet. Some of them, Arlington Pond is almost empty, and they do that every year. Is it possible to do that at Freeman Lake? Would it work? Can it be done? Do we have the money? Has anybody thought about that?
So water drawdown, that was one of the things that we did evaluate in the report. We didn't recommend it because.
Folks, 1 meeting, please.
We didn't recommend it just because right now, with the controls on the dam not being fully operational as far as we understand it, it would be difficult to do that. And also, it would not
We could
control
make
the-
them operational, or we could spend money and put a whole new one in. Is that, I mean, that's a possibility.
And, well, it also wouldn't help with the water chestnut control. It would actually probably make that worse, as well as the curly
We'll
leaf.
pick those. We'll pick that. I saw the spot. It was about that big. Yeah.
It's one of those things that could be done, but
Yeah.
we didn't recommend, we evaluated, but we didn't recommend it this time around. The other issue is, now this winter is actually probably a great winter for doing drawdown because we had some cold before we had any snow, and that's kind of what you want.
Yep.
But you're rolling the dice every year, and it's getting a little harder to roll a good roll.
Well, like he said, we're never gonna get rid of all of it.
Right.
So it can't happen.
Right.
But we wanna know what's the cheapest, best way, and why, what are we waiting for? This has been going on for years. We're still talking. Let's do something.
So Nabasset Lake in Westford, they do drawdowns. They used to do big ones. I don't think they've done a big one for a while, but they got rid of their milfoil issue pretty much just with drawdown. It worked. They were doing 6 feet for a while. Yeah.
Just to clarify, you would probably go with the chemicals, I take it. In this particular instance,
to get-
because of money and
As a first step to get a handle on the weeds and be able to switch to something else.
Gotcha.
Or to do a lower grade repeat treatment as part of your program. Yeah, that's really the most cost effective and effective overall way to get a handle on large areas of dense weeds.
Thank you.
Yep.
And just
Thank you.
a finer point, though, you were talking about targeted use of chemicals.
Right.
Whereas the original proposal was just blast the whole lake. Is that correct?
So in the report, we actually do recommend looking at both the spot treatments, but, and there's some feasibility questions on this, a sonar treatment, which is it would end up being like a whole lake treatment that you wouldn't do every year, but could do once or maybe every 5 years or something like that, depending on how often you needed it, could also be an option for this lake to control, particularly fanwort, which is not really well controlled with a lot of the other methods on a systemic basis. So we did keep that in as an option.
Thank you.
So,
We need to button this up though too, but just one last thing, yeah.
just as a point of clarification, because I think people might be confused, I've heard a couple of people mention or talk tonight about all the vegetation in the middle of the lake. But the map we saw of the vegetation survey you did showed 0% concentration in the middle of the lake. It was only around the shoreline. Was that because it was only a shoreline survey?
No, I didn't do the survey myself, but my understanding is that the whole lake was surveyed, except for the places that were too deep to support plant growth.
So there's a bit of a disconnect there. If you did,
Sounds like it.
If we're hearing that there's a lot of vegetation in the middle of the lake, but your survey showed none, was that maybe because the survey was done at a time where there wasn't any?
No, I think, we definitely timed the survey so that we could get out to the lake when we expected to see most of the species and peak growth. So
Okay.
it should have picked it up. If there's, I guess if there's information that can be shared with us as to where the sort of island in the middle is, that would be helpful, because I can go back and just check and make sure that the data are.
Well, I mean, that does seem like a major disconnect, just my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm Wanda Dunn. I've been dealing with this since 1992. I do have a 1993 report that they mapped the weeds, and there has not been a significant change from 93 to now, to your report. You did a great job. I'm really impressed comparing it to Dave Warden's from 95. My question, since we're talking about the beach, how big of an area are we talking about if you want to do spot treatment? Because that hasn't changed since 1993.
I know, I believe that it's about 2 acres of spot treatment. I think that's the beach area that we treat over at Hart Pond. So I think that.
Are you, well,
around
the
that.
reason I ask is because you put out ropes that people can't swim past it. So are you going past that zone to spot treat that area?
We
Or
would need
just where people are swimming?
So for spot treatment to work, I'm not a herbicide expert, but from my understanding, because I have been managing Hart Pond for the past few years and involved in this as well, is that they need to keep a certain concentration. So we'd have to talk to the treatment contractors for exactly how far past or what the range is, but, they've got it down to a science literally, but they, they would calculate that with the depth and with the target area, treatment target
And
area.
we went through this with Solitude wanting to do this, so the other question is gonna be, coming up, is that we have such a wind from the north going to the south to the dam that if they're gonna put treatments in there, this is what we talked about, and I hate to repeat all this and go through this, because there's so much other information that we need to go through to address Stony Brook. But you can't guarantee that when they put the treatment out there, that it's gonna go down to the bottom to hit the weeds, because we have such a wind from Route 40 all the way down, and we'd already discussed all this.
So
So that's something we have to keep in mind, if that's what you guys are gonna do, and why won't you do barriers instead? Benthic barriers, in the area where people are swimming.
We are hoping to do a benthic barrier pilot study this year. It's just not, I don't think it's gonna be feasible to do it on a large scale. And from my experience with the treatment contractors, they take all that into account. They're going to, dose it appropriately for that area. And I think it, moves pretty quickly. I don't think it's gonna just all
They
get
have to know
washed.
about the winds, which was not in this report from TRC. They didn't do that, a report of any type of circulation through the lake, if I'm correct. Is that right?
Yeah, that wasn't in our scope to do a circulation
Right,
study. There are ways to do it, but
yeah.
I guess I would just say that circulation can change too, based on, so if you have prevailing winds from the southwest and then you have a late season nor'easter come through in June, it could switch everything up. So I think the best guidance that we usually give when advising our clients on when to time herbicide treatments is do it on a day when there's good weather, not strong winds, so that where you're actually adding the herbicide is where it's mostly going to stay. Yeah, it's not like it goes straight down and it stops
Right.
there. There's diffusion processes as well, but most of the herbicides that are being used, with the few exceptions, are designed to break down very quickly, so that even if they do move around, you don't have the active product like making it all the way around the lake. They pretty much have broken down before they get outside of a certain area.
Okay.
So we didn't do a circulation study, but I don't think that's critical to doing an herbicide treatment, and I don't know of anywhere else where that's been done. It doesn't mean it hasn't been, but I don't know of anywhere else where they've done that
Well, it's just
first.
that so it gets to this point that I found my 1993 study from the Department of Environmental Protection that they did when I asked them to, because back then they had the manpower and the money to do it. So as a resident, I asked them to come out and do it. So I looked at their map from the weeds to your map to the weeds. The biggest, heaviest area, and it still is to this day, has always been on the west side. Stony Brook Inlet to the area around Willis Drive at the end. And I found out one of the conservation members, John, I don't know his last name, I guess when the lake went out, he was one of the people that backhoed a lot of the weeds and sediment that was in the lake in that section where the beaver lodges and everything are now. So that might be because that's been sitting there and was there, but when they filled the lake back in, that might have something to do with why there's so many weeds in that area. I don't know. I'm not an expert in that, but I'm just letting you know. Then 6th Ave, that has gotten worse, and I'm wondering because that's such a hill, we have a washout that comes down and goes right across conservation area into the lake. When we have salt, the brine that we're using now, but in past years it was just salt, that goes right into the lake. Do we put a catch basin in there, but then you have to have the funds put a catch basin in there and then clean it out to keep anything from going into the lake. Also, 1st Ave, same issue. Big hill, goes right into, across Willis Drive, across conservation land, into the lake. All those weeds have gotten worse from 93 to your report, because I'm assuming from watershed, all that sediment going in straight into the lake. Route 40, I believe there's one catch basin on Coolidge Road, I think. But that pipe that goes under Route 40 goes into the lake. There's that one that comes in. And you had the weeds have gotten a little bit worse there as well, Route 40, where Marty's Bait Shop used to be. I'm aging myself, sorry. There was a water main break at the senior center that has when they put in the parking lot there, they put in a culvert that goes under Route 40, and that drains into the lake as well, on the corner of Russell Road and Route 40. That water main break just happened within the month, and I'm wondering if that filtering system was that damage that goes under Route 40 into our lake. Because that just happened like within the month.
I'm not sure about the water main break, but some of the other inlets, stormwater inlets, like that was a big focus of this study. And, they sampled the stormwater inlets that were flowing when they went out there. And that was all taken into account when they determined that still most of the phosphorus loading is coming from the Stony Brook diversion. That was, I'd say, a key part of the study was to look at other sources of phosphorus coming in. And, so I don't think that they are contributing, but I think that it's still.
Just something to keep in mind, because I know there's another pipe too from Cart Path that goes right into the lake as well.
Yeah, and
That's the road.
also with, like, you stated that a lot of the distribution of the plant growth is not hugely changed over the past 30 years from the 1995 study. I mean, so it's been really, really bad for 30 years. It's not going to resolve itself on its own, I feel like is a key takeaway from that information. Just because it's, the fact that a lot of that growth is kind of stabilized or kind of what it has been is why water chestnut is at the forefront of our priorities, not because it's, not because the other ones aren't really bad, but because we have a limited amount of funding and that one's still not at, maximum crucial point. It's still something we could get ahead of. And in the report, a systemic sonar treatment is still one of the recommendations that would help with some of the widespread biomass. We just don't have funding for it this year. That's why it's not one of our next three steps.
Understandable, but I just want to point out that if we're going to look at this as a whole, watershed, what's feeding into Freeman Lake, then we need to look at what's dumping into Freeman Lake. That's why I point out 6th Ave, 1st Ave, and what happened in the past in the back of the swamp.
If I can just quickly just touch on so we are looking at a lot of those areas. Some of those streets are private, we're looking at ownership of some of those streets, and also given the grades of some of those, like, new catch basins potentially would be, it's not an easy, there's no easy solution. So we have probably for the past year been looking at some potential options. It's just going to take a permit, it will take time to design. So I don't have the cost in front of me, but it wasn't adding just a catch basin. It was and it was also looking at potentially regrading, which that has more permanent impacts as well. So,
I'm gonna have to say, Christine, I appreciate that. We are way over time. Wanda, I appreciate you bringing the notes, because it sounds like we need to
we need to talk
continue
again.
this.
Yes.
I don't know what you want to let them know.
Yeah, so I think if there's comments, submit them, and then, like I said, we will probably provide some type of summary document to respond to the comments. And then the next input session, I think we are moving forward, at least permitting, at least the first, we have to if we're going to try to target something for June. And at that point, we would have public input. We also, happy to talk to, if residents want to come talk to us, we'd also, have conversations as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I want to just plug C&D Harvester out of Connecticut. I talked to him the other day. They're an eco harvester machine, and I think that would be the best way to get that middle. It was a channel that you guys are all talking about, the weeds in the middle. So I have all the information from them. I talked to him for about an hour the other day.
Yeah.
So an eco harvester machine might do the best for the middle of the lake.
Right.
So if anyone wants to be added to the email list to find out about the next public input or the summary, feel free to write down your name and.
Thank you all.
Point of clarification, because even now I'm a little bit confused. So is the next public input session going to be part of the public hearing for the permitting?
So for those three, so what we're going to do is receive comments, and then we're going to provide to the email just basically a response in our final report. We are going to move forward with those three recommendations because that's all we can really fund right now. So for those three recommendations, we would be receiving public input at the public hearing at Conservation Commission.
Why couldn't you hold a public input session before that? Just so that we can get a heads up, whether, you know.
I guess we can, it's just a, yeah, we, I guess we have to look at
Well, let's
timeline.
talk about it.
Yeah,
I
and,
think that's the right approach.
and, you know, we've been in contact previously with Wanda and Peter, you know, last year when this whole started. If we wanted to sit down again, you know, we could arrange something like that, and we could let anyone else know, maybe an informal, you know, discussion or something like that. We
And
could
like I
post it.
said, just be heard, reach out to Christine,
Yeah.
Courtney, and, because I know the majority of the residents do want to see something, we don't want to see so that way, everybody's in agreement of taking some action to address it, so.
We could even
I
do a
appreciate everybody
survey.
coming for that topic, but we definitely have to move along.
To show how
So thank you for that. Should have already moved along, but that's okay, we want to make sure everybody got
Yeah.
heard. Thank you. Christine,
Matt and Courtney.
thank you very
Yeah.
much. Real quick, do we have a timeline on the wayfinding signs?
So right now it's not the best time to install signs, so we have them at DPW.
Nice.
And we are waiting just for the weather to be in better conditions. So I would say by sometime this spring, so March maybe, April. There are some
it is.
signs, though, that will be in the center that we will be retaining at DPW that would be installed as part of the Vinyl Square project. So we did order those signs. We have them. But there's a majority, especially as you're approaching Vinyl Square, or in the areas that we will be able to install this spring.
So you guys went through and thought about where it makes the most
Placement,
sense.
everything. We spent, I think, a year and a half looking at placement.
you.
So
We
I think we're
appreciate that.
good.
Awesome. The next thing, item on the agenda is a fire station update, and there was some,
Yeah, I mean, I know Tim Powderly's here with Permanent Building Committee. I do have an brief update too.
Okay.
I was speaking with Chief Ryan, so he's been looking at the progress, so they should be wrapping up soon, and we'll be looking at punch lists. I believe it was next week, I think, potentially, so we're nearing the end of the installation. I know there were some questions about, like, the selection of it. Yeah.
folks,
Hey,
if
could you
you,
guys take it outside if you
please.
want to keep talking?
we need to be heard here. Thank you.
There were some comment or questions about how it was selected. As you all might know, there's been some staging around the new fire station for some time. Going back almost 3 years ago, the brick veneer started falling off of the side of the building, it really providing a safety concern. We went through effort to do a tap test to see if we could re-adhere those bricks. What we found is, like, during different rain events or other storms, that the rainfall was breaking down that material that was bonding the brick to the brick veneer to the wall of the new or the exterior of the fire stations. So obviously we had to find another material. We consulted with Weston and Sampson. And they came up with a rendering or a proposal. We looked at different materials. They did look around the area just to try to mix it in with the area. I know there's a lot of brick in the given being a mill, industrial area. There is some metal siding in the area. And I went around by the mill building just up the way, and it looks very similar. So. And we did review that through the Permanent Building Committee. But I don't know if there's any particular questions to the progress or to the selection of the material.
I have one
Sure.
question.
Actually, this is Laura Lee. I'm a member of the committee. Sorry I couldn't be there tonight. I just want to mention, I understand that you looked at it and you might think that there's something in the area that looks like that. However, I don't know if you've come to look at the building. I mean, it clearly looks like a storage shed. It's just a silver metal. It doesn't look anything like the area. So I guess what I'm wondering, is there anything that can be done to try and improve the look at this point? Because It belongs more on 129 in a warehouse area, in my opinion. It looks horrific, but, so I'm just wondering if anything can be done.
So, Laura, Tim Powderly, Chairman of the Permanent Building Committee. So as Christine gave you the timeline there, we're at this point, there's nothing else that can be done with the metal. We were somewhat restricted in what we could choose in replacement of the brick. Clearly, the brick was a failure. That was our number one option. Within the contract that we had with replacements, the metal felt within that budget. We didn't have a brick that was suitable. So that was the best option we could come up with that we came up with, so.
Tim, Gary.
Well, I certainly hope that the other fire stations don't go this way because I think it's extremely unattractive. It just does not belong here. I think it's hugely disappointing. I mean, it looked bad before when it was kind of fake brick, but this is truly, I mean, it's just an eyesore. It's horrible. It was put next to this beautiful North Town Hall in a historic neighborhood with beautiful mills. We're trying to improve it. I personally am extremely disappointed.
Tim, do you want to talk to the window molding? The white molding that's planned?
There is no white molding. We couldn't get the white molding with the product that ended up being selected, that we talked about. So what you see now is what the finished product is, with the exception of the foundation piece around the bottom.
Tim, I had a response from Chief Ryan. He said that the metal actually did cost more than the brick. Is that right?
There was a slight increase. So we were restricted. The contractor was only required to give us, to repair or replace what was there based on the failure. We dealt with the contractor for almost 2 years to finally get this replacement. And we did get them to agree to a slight increase to cover the metal that was there. The original proposal was a clapboard-like siding, cement hardy board. We didn't feel it matched the building. It matched the town hall, but it didn't fit the architecture of that building that was there, which is why we went with the metal panel. When we looked at the metal panel, in keeping with what we were trying to match, the installation was chosen as horizontal to keep those brick lines going. We added a couple bands, high and low, but we were somewhat constrained in what the contractor was willing to pay for and what we could actually put there.
We just voted on $25 million for 2 other fire stations. Do we think about adding in any kind of funding so that we could get something that was aesthetically pleasing?
We didn't because we were working within the contracts of the original building.
Okay.
So we would have had to have made an agreement with the contractor to put back what was there and possibly have another failure.
Yeah.
Or end up suing the contractor to get an appropriate replacement.
Yeah.
In kind. So we felt like this was the best solution.
Is there any way this metal could be painted to at least tone it down, bring it down to a red brick-like color or a brown? I mean, not that would help much, but maybe it would help a little bit.
So the red was actually the first color we looked at, and the color combination didn't work well with the brick that was there in the apparatus bay. It was more of a burgundy maroon. It looked like you was trying to match something, but you didn't quite get there, so we went with the complementary color of the gray.
It's not complimentary, it's a warehouse, but okay. Could you try and get paint it so that it is more complimentary?
It's a baked enamel that's on there now, so you wouldn't have the durability that you have when it comes from the factory.
Okay.
If you were to paint it, you'd have ongoing maintenance issues with that.
Is the building committee happy with it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was unanimous vote that selected it, so.
But are they happy with the install now?
They've been updated all along. We haven't had a meeting since, we have a meeting coming up in 2 weeks, but they've been updated all along. We haven't had any objections.
Okay.
How about the new stations? Are they gonna have something similar to that?
Probably not. I mean, the goal is always to match what's there, what's in the neighborhood, so each one will be a little different, but we'll have to see. The design contract for those are due in next week, and we'll work with the architect on that.
Those ones are not modular, though.
What's that?
Those are not modular, but they are.
It's a possibility. So the design is going out as modular and stick built.
Got it. Thank you.
So the new ones might not be modular?
We have to look at both options when it goes out to bid.
How's the architect get chosen?
There's an RFP that went out. Its bid opening is next Wednesday. And then we have it'll be presented to the committee the following Tuesday, which is the 25th.
So there will be like multiple proposals from architects, I guess, in the area, and you choose?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, there's a whole process explained in the document. We individuals review the proposals and then we review them together. And we go through to really select it could be the top one or two if we want to, and we can bring them in for interviews as well.
Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate the update, because that was definitely not what we expected, but I appreciate there was some challenges there for sure.
Hey, Tim, I do appreciate the efforts that you put in, because we all go into these, committees, and it's nights and weekends and a lot of that stuff. I do think you probably hear the expression of disappointment from a lot of the residents and everybody around. I don't know what happened, Joe. We had been on a pretty good roll with communications with the town manager and stuff, and it's our fault for not, going and knowing that the permanent building committee was having these kind of meetings, but I think we ought to try to figure out how we get back on track for just bringing these things up at meetings. If it had been raised at a meeting, we certainly would have gone to,
Yeah, we didn't know
there
about
would have
it.
been plenty of input and things like that on that. I'm certain Laura would have been there, but
This
we're
has
probably
been a
not
topic
on
on
that.
our agenda since 2021.
Yeah, as I said, we're the ones that have to look out for it. We had a pretty good rhythm going on and would have expected that someone would have said, we're going through that with something that prominent of a fixture in North Chelmsford. I don't know how we do it, but we should get back on a roll with, town hall and making sure that anything big is at
I
least
just
brought to our
think that,
attention.
I think Paul said it somehow got off the radar and it was missed. And what I do know, because if I saw Chief, I knew he was, fighting to make sure that the contractor was making good on, the project that went wrong. They were blaming it on COVID, as the materials, and they didn't want to go to the same thing. It was going to happen again, and it was just, I feel bad for the chief. He's trying to run the fire department. He has to worry about building, but that's part of it, and it was something that fell through, and it doesn't look preferable. I understand. Yeah. I don't even know if, Evan, are you out there? Do you have any quick updates, real quick, or no? All right, perfect. Committee updates, just real short and sweet. There's been, things that have happened this past year. I'm worried about my bandwidth. Joan has, moved out of the state, so she is actually now looking to eventually retire, so we don't know how long Joan is gonna be on. And I know Laura Lynn has been very busy chasing the meetings, et cetera. So if anybody is interested in becoming more involved, nobody's going anywhere, but I think we just need to continue to look for volunteers, more people that want to continue to join in the fun. But without further ado.
So noted.
I absolutely want to take this opportunity, although a lot of people turned out the lights out there, to thank Virginia for all her time as being our select board liaison. She's not going to be on the select board going forward after this next election, but I can tell you she has been a very good help to the whole committee, but myself personally, making me aware and keeping me honest, on track, and checking in with me leading into every select board meeting. Is there anything we want to raise with awareness with the select board? And she's been phenomenal. And she will be missed as our select board liaison. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Virginia. And good news to report is no, I'm not done with you yet. So, but thankfully, Virginia did say, when I asked her, what are you gonna do? She goes, do you have room on the committee? And we definitely would love to have you involved, and we'll talk more about that. So thank you for wanting to continue to be involved with this committee, Virginia. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
And Mike Walsh is not going to be on the planning board going past this election, and Mike has been a great contributor to this committee, and he's been a phenomenal help. And I appreciate Mike, and he also said he wants to, because they're all North residents, and they appreciate what we do in the committee, and I want to thank Mike Walsh as well for all the time and effort he made with the planning board, because
Thank you, Mike.
This felt like a planning board meeting tonight. A little close.
This is one of our record-breaking times, so for that I apologize, but those are the updates I had. So I am not going far, but I don't know if, depending on where I land with my next job, I'm looking for a job, I'm not too sure if I'm gonna be able to maintain my position in the chair, so, but as I look around this committee, Laura Lynn out there somewhere in Zoom, and Joan and Laura Lee, you just heard from, we have a great team here, and I appreciate everybody's involvement. Brian Kramer's here sitting at the table as well, and Billy, everything. We're a great team here, and we want to continue that, and you don't have to be sitting on this committee to help contribute, so that's why I appreciate people stepping up and joining us here tonight, and want to continue to make the town as good as it can be, and make it great. Anybody else have anything else they want to share?
I do have one for open discussion. Asphalt plant quarry traffic, there's still a significant number of concerns from the residents. I know Paul normally gives an update. He wasn't able to make it. There's been activity with some of the residents, the town in Newport. I don't know of all the details. I do believe they're meeting again next week. There was a ZBA meeting. Virginia, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a cease and desist order put out there that has been tabled to a future date. I did speak to the individual that is leading the Ledge Road effort today. He could not make it tonight, but would like for our support, and I think that we should do that. I know myself and Virginia had been talking about how we could help those residents out. I do think, as this committee, we've got to support Ledge Road, but we should also make sure that we're thinking about, as we should, North Chelmsford, Groton Road, Swain Road, Dunstable Road are all impacted, as well. So if it's okay with this committee, we probably invite them to our next meeting, because they're looking for our support and our help to corral this and push it forward.
Perfect.
When is the next meeting? Is there a regular?
We do not have a next meeting schedule. We want to get on a better cadence on that.
Yes, we need to do that.
I have one also quick update is, so the next select board meeting, February 24th, I believe, I will be presenting this year's paving and sidewalk plan. That also was just released, the paving was released in the town manager's newsletter. I know Main Street has been discussed a lot, and so we are advancing the design efforts of Main Street, which and that's more of just than just a paving implementation. That's also a potential traffic calming, and adding addition of sidewalks. So that design effort will be taking place this year.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that, in terms of where Howard Sign is sort of pre-25, I assume you're in the 5 to 10% range? Sorry, yeah.
For
How
Main.
far along is that design?
So we actually are putting out an RFP to solicit, so we have not done that yet.
Thank you.
Let's hope it's not Newport.
All right, well, this has certainly gone long. We've broken our record on this one. Paul, did you have one last thing to close us
I'm
out?
gonna take you out in left field now, okay? We're all at home plate.
Yes.
I was down, I got grandsons now, I take them fishing now. Bring me up to date. Why is that boat launch shut down in down South Wells Field? After all the effort they putting that in, now you can't use it.
Well, it's been
Yes.
pretty much condemned.
So yeah, it was condemned about 2 years ago, let's say. It had a severe amount of rebar exposed. Severe,
Rebar?
yeah, it's basically all deteriorated.
Well, why don't they, I mean, here we got a river, access to the river. The town spent that money to have a river patrol and all of that. I don't know what they did with it.
So the state is designing it right now, and it is with the Army Corps of Engineers. So, yeah, it is being designed. The state has a plan to basically replace that, but it has to go through the Army Corps of Engineer design, which is happening right now.
But it is in the future to make that usable again.
Yes, exactly.
On the list.
Any idea of the time factor?
So-
The Army Corps of Engineers.
It was, I don't know if it's gonna happen this year or if it's going to be next year because of that design, the duration. Originally, it was targeted that it was 18-month duration, but this happened 18 months ago and there's still no
It's a
update.
shame it took this long. It's almost like the Rourke Bridge, you know?
Yeah, so,
That's been out of service, huh?
Luckily, that's not Chelmsford.
so I hope if it's not this year, next year, but we don't have an updated timeline, I will try to get that for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, did everybody get a chance to review Laura Lynn's minutes from November? That email went out earlier today. Awesome. You want to make a motion to approve
I
them?
make the motion to approve the minutes of November.
Okay, Bill makes a motion to approve the minutes. Anybody else want to second?
I'll be completely honest, I didn't look at them, so I can't second it.
Okay,
Second.
all right. All those in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. All right. That will wrap up tonight's meeting. We will work on getting a rhythm going with our meetings, and I'll talk to Christine about that and try to get out a regular agenda, so with that, who would like to make a motion to adjourn?
Sure, yeah, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Bill seconds. All those in favor? Aye, aye. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.